My daughter-in-law slammed her crystal wine glass so hard on the dining table I thought the delicate stem would snap in half. The dark red liquid splashed over the rim and stained the pristine white tablecloth like a fresh wound. She pointed her manicured finger right at my face and screamed, "Be quiet, no one here needs you anyway." The entire room went dead silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. The soft jazz music playing in the background suddenly felt like a funeral march. I looked across the table at my son Terrence, the boy I broke my back to raise, the boy I sacrificed my own youth for. I expected him to say something, to stand up for his father. Instead, he just kept his head down and methodically cut his steak. So I did not yell, I did not argue, I did not shed a single tear. I just quietly reached into my pocket, picked up the keys to my old Ford truck, and walked out the front door. What they did not know was that walking out that door was the most expensive mistake they would ever make in their entire lives. Before I tell you the rest of this story, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe respect is earned, not given, and that family should never treat you like a burden. My name is Desmond Holloway. I am 71 years old, and for the last 5 years, I have swallowed my pride more times than a man ever should. It was Thanksgiving dinner at Terrence's house, a massive, beautiful suburban home in Atlanta that I actually helped him secure, though nobody sitting at that expensive mahogany table seemed to remember or care about that fact. The conflict started over something incredibly simple. We were eating, passing around the roasted turkey and the side dishes when I casually looked over at Terrence. I asked him if he had finally taken care of the property tax bill for the house. It was a simple fatherly question. I knew the deadline was in 3 days, and I knew Terrence had a bad habit of letting important mail pile up on his desk until the last possible minute. Amber, my 34-year-old daughter-in-law, dropped her silver fork. It clattered loudly against her fine china plate. Amber is a woman who runs a boutique Pilates studio, always dressed in expensive neutral colors, always making sure everyone in the room knows she grew up in a gated community. She looked at my faded flannel shirt and my calloused hands like they were a disease that was infecting her perfect holiday aesthetic. "Can we have one dinner, just one, where you do not ruin the mood with your poverty mindset?" she snapped. Her voice was sharp and loud, cutting right through the warm atmosphere of the room. I kept my voice steady and low. "It is not a poverty mindset, Amber. It is called responsibility. The county does not care about the holiday season. They care about their money, and they will put a lien on this house if you ignore them." That is when she lost her mind. She slammed her wine glass down, her face flushed red with unhinged anger. "Be quiet," she yelled. "Just be quiet. No one here needs you. No one asked for your financial advice. You sit in our house eating the food my parents paid for, acting like you run things. You are just a guest here, a burden. We do not need a lecture from a retired warehouse worker who barely scraped by his whole life." I felt a cold tightness grip my chest, not from shock, but from a deep, heavy exhaustion. I slowly turned my gaze to Terrence. He is 38 years old, a grown man, a man I raised by myself after his mother, my beautiful Vivian, passed away 5 years ago. I worked double shifts at the freight yards in the blazing Georgia heat so he could go to a good university, so his hands would stay clean. Terrence did not look up. He kept his eyes glued to his plate. He chewed his bottom lip nervously. He let his wife disrespect his father, the man who gave him everything, right to his face. In that moment, his silence spoke volumes. He chose his side, and he chose it without uttering a single word. Sitting directly across from me were Amber's parents, Richard and Susan. They were wealthy, arrogant, and always looked at me like I was a charity case their daughter had graciously allowed into their family. Susan took a delicate sip of her sparkling water and sighed loudly. "Oh, Desmond," Susan said, her voice dripping with that fake, sugary pity that people use when they want to insult you politely. "Amber is just stressed from managing her successful business. But really, you should not concern yourself with adult financial matters. Terrence and Amber are doing perfectly fine. It must be very hard for you to understand how modern, affluent households manage their wealth." Richard chuckled under his breath, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive silk shirt. "Let the old man be Susan," he said with a condescending smirk. "When you have lived paycheck to paycheck your whole life, every bill feels like the end of the world. Desmond here is just used to the struggle. It is a generational trauma thing, I suppose." I looked at the four of them. For 5 years since my wife died, I had played a role. I wore my old work boots. I drove my beat-up truck. I lived quietly. I let them think I was just a tired old black man surviving on a meager social security check, living off the scraps of their supposedly glamorous life. I let them think I was helpless because I wanted to stay close to my son. I thought maintaining the peace was more important than maintaining my ego. But sitting there looking at the disgust in Amber's eyes, the mockery in Richard's smile, and the absolute cowardice in my son's posture, a switch flipped inside my brain. The grandfather they thought they knew died right there at that dinner table. I did not raise my voice. I did not throw my napkin in anger. I did not try to defend my dignity to people who had none. I simply placed my fork down on the table, resting it perfectly parallel to the knife. I wiped my mouth calmly with the linen napkin. Then I stood up. The heavy wooden chair scraped against the hardwood floor, the sound echoing loudly in the tense, silent dining room. Terrence finally looked up. His eyes were wide, suddenly looking like a scared little boy who knew he had just crossed a line he could never uncross. "Dad," he mumbled weakly, his voice shaking. "Sit down. Please do not make a scene." "Enjoy your dinner, Terrence," I said. My voice was completely hollow, dead, devoid of any fatherly warmth. I reached into the pocket of my faded jeans and pulled out my heavy ring of keys. They jingled sharply in the quiet room. I turned my back to the table, ignoring the stunned looks on their faces. I walked down the long, brightly lit hallway with slow, deliberate steps. I reached the heavy oak front door, grabbed the brass handle, and pulled it open. I stepped out into the crisp November air of Atlanta. The cold wind hit my face, but it felt incredibly refreshing. Behind me from inside the dining room, I heard Amber scoff loudly. "Let him go," she said dismissively. "He will be back tomorrow crying when he realizes he has nothing else and nowhere to go." I pulled the door shut behind me with a solid, definitive click. She was wrong. I was never going back. And by the time the sun came up on Monday morning, they were all going to learn exactly who they had just thrown out of their house. I sat in the driver's seat of my 1998 Ford pickup truck. The engine rumbled to life with a heavy, familiar growl. Outside, the streetlights of the affluent neighborhood cast long, cold shadows across the manicured lawns. Before I could even shift into drive, my phone started vibrating violently in my chest pocket. It buzzed once, twice, then 10 times in rapid succession. I pulled it out and stared at the bright screen. There were 15 text messages, all from my son Terrence. A small, foolish part of my heart, the part that still remembered him as a little boy holding my hand at the hardware store, hoped it was an apology. I thought maybe he had chased after me. Maybe he realized what he had just allowed his wife to do. I opened the messages. My eyes scanned the words, and any lingering warmth I had for him evaporated into the cold night air. "You humiliated Amber in front of her parents," the first message read. "How could you do that at Thanksgiving dinner?" The next message said, "She is upstairs crying right now. Her father is furious. You made us look like trash." And then the final message, the one that sealed his fate. "Do not bother coming back to this house until you are ready to get on your knees and apologize to my wife." I did not type back. I did not call him to scream. I simply pressed the power button, turned the phone off completely, and tossed it onto the passenger seat. Apologize. The word echoed in my mind like a bad joke. They really thought I was just a broke, helpless old man with nowhere to go. They thought I would be sleeping in my truck tonight, shivering in the cold, waiting for them to graciously allow me back into their lives. I put the truck in gear and pulled away from the curb. I drove away from the suburbs and headed straight into the heart of downtown Atlanta. For years, I let Terrence and Amber believe I was barely surviving on a meager pension. I let them think the old warehouse job I had back in the day left me with nothing but a bad back and a rusty truck. But what I never told my son, what I kept hidden to see if he would love me for me and not for my wallet, was the truth about my life after my wife Vivian passed away. I did not just work at the freight yards. I eventually bought the freight yards. I built a commercial real estate and warehousing empire from the ground up, pouring concrete with my own 2 hands before I ever wore a tailored suit. I drove past the glittering skyscrapers until I reached a towering, ultra-exclusive residential high-rise in the financial district. I pulled my beat-up truck right up to the valet stand. The young valet, a sharp kid named Marcus, rushed over immediately. He did not judge my faded flannel shirt or my dusty boots. He opened my door with the utmost respect. "Good evening, Mr. Holloway," Marcus said, taking the keys, the usual spot. "Yes, Marcus, thank you," I replied, handing him a crisp $50 bill. I walked through the grand lobby with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers. The concierge nodded politely as I bypassed the main elevators and stepped into the private keycard access lift. I swiped a sleek black card, and the elevator shot up to the top floor, the penthouse. When the doors opened, I stepped into a sprawling 5,000 square foot apartment enclosed entirely in floor-to-ceiling glass. The glittering skyline of Atlanta stretched out beneath me like a carpet of diamonds. This was my sanctuary, my secret office, the place I came to manage my portfolio away from the greedy, judging eyes of my daughter-in-law. I walked past the imported leather sofas and the grand piano, heading straight for the master study. I did not come here to relax. Terrence had made a passing comment at dinner about their finances right before Amber exploded. Something about an unexpected banking issue delaying the property tax payment. At the time, I thought he was just making excuses for being lazy. But sitting in the silence of my penthouse, my instincts, the same instincts that built a multi-million-dollar empire, started screaming at me. I went to the heavy oak desk and pushed aside a stack of investment portfolios. Behind a false panel in the wall was a biometric steel safe. I pressed my thumb against the scanner. The heavy door clicked and swung open. Inside were the ledgers and statements for a specific modest bank account. It was the only account Terrence knew about. It was a joint emergency fund I had set up years ago, meant only to be used if I ever had a major medical crisis, or if Terrence ever found himself in a life or death situation. I kept exactly $100,000 in it. I never monitored it closely because I trusted my own flesh and blood. I pulled out the thick envelope containing the latest statements from the bank, tearing it open. I spread the papers across the smooth wood of my desk. I put on my reading glasses and traced my finger down the columns of numbers. My breath caught in my throat. The balance was not $100,000. It was barely $20,000. $80,000 was gone. Vanished. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. I flipped quickly to the transaction history pages. There were no large single transfers. It was methodical, systematic. Over the past 8 months, someone had been making steady withdrawals of $5,000, sometimes $8,000, transferring the money out to an external, unrecognized account. I dug deeper into the folder, pulling out the printed copies of the withdrawal slips the bank sends at the end of the quarter. I held the papers up to the light of the desk lamp. At the bottom of each slip was a signature. It was my name, Desmond Holloway. But it was not my handwriting. The loops were too clean, the slant was entirely wrong. It was a forgery. And it was not a very good one. I sank slowly into my leather chair, staring at the forged signature. My own son. Or perhaps his precious high society wife. One of them, or maybe both of them together, had been siphoning my emergency fund for nearly a year. They were bleeding me dry behind my back, smiling in my face, and then telling me to be quiet at the dinner table because I was a burden. The anger that washed over me was not hot or explosive. It was freezing cold. It was the kind of anger that clarifies the mind and hardens the soul. They stole $80,000 from a man they thought was poor. They stole from a father who would have given them his last dime if they had only asked. I reached for the sleek silver phone on my desk. I did not call Terrence. I did not call the police just yet. I called my private wealth manager, a man who answered on the second ring despite the late hour. "Listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice as hard as concrete. "I need you to flag the joint account ending in 472. Freeze it completely. No money goes in and absolutely no money comes out. And tomorrow morning I need the full routing details of the account that has been receiving the unauthorized transfers." I hung up the phone and looked out the window at the sprawling city. Amber thought she had won tonight. She thought she had established her dominance and kicked the worthless old man to the curb. Terrence thought he could demand an apology from me. They thought they were playing a game with a helpless victim. But they had no idea they had just declared war on a man who owned the very ground they walked on. The $80,000 was just the thread. I was going to pull it, and I was going to unravel their entire fake, luxurious life until there was absolutely nothing left. Monday morning hit the city of Atlanta with a cold, heavy drizzle. I parked my old truck 3 blocks away from the downtown branch of Vanguard Financial. I was wearing the same faded denim jacket and worn-out work boots I always wore. Let people look at me and see a tired old man. I knew exactly who I was. I had spent the entire weekend ignoring the endless phone calls from my son. I let him sweat. I let him wonder where the old man was sleeping. Now it was time to permanently lock the doors on the house they were trying to rob. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the bank. The lobby was expansive quiet and smelled of expensive coffee and polished marble. But that quiet was currently being shattered by one sharp, annoying voice echoing off the walls. A voice I knew all too well. It was Amber. I did not rush over. I stayed back, blending into the shadows near the ATM vestibule. I wanted to see how deep they were willing to dig their own graves. Amber was standing right in front of the branch manager's glass-enclosed office, waving her hands in the air like a madwoman. She was wearing a perfectly tailored beige trench coat, looking every bit the wealthy suburban wife. Terrence was standing right beside her, shifting his weight from foot to foot, looking down at the floor, just like he did at the Thanksgiving dinner table. He was a coward standing by while his wife orchestrated the destruction of his own father. I moved a few steps closer, staying out of their direct line of sight. Amber's voice carried clearly across the polished floor. "Listen to me very carefully, Mr. Davis," she demanded, slamming her manicured hand onto the manager's desk. "This is a family emergency. My father-in-law has gone missing and he is not in his right mind. We are his sole caretakers and we need access to the joint account ending in 472 right this second." The branch manager, a younger man in a tight suit, looked incredibly stressed. He kept glancing at his computer screen. "Ma'am," he said politely but firmly. "As I explained to your husband over the phone, that specific account was frozen over the weekend by the primary account holder. I cannot bypass a hard freeze without his physical presence and proper identification." Amber scoffed loudly, throwing her hands up in disbelief. "He does not even know what day it is," she yelled. "Look at this document." She reached into her designer handbag and slapped a piece of paper onto the manager's desk. "This is an official medical certificate from Dr. Evans," she said, her voice dripping with fake desperation. "It states clearly that Desmond Holloway is suffering from severe paranoia and early-onset dementia. He is a danger to himself. We have to pay for his specialized medical care facility today, or he loses his spot. You are denying a sick elderly man his vital medical treatment because of a computer glitch. Do you want to be responsible for what happens to him?" I stood there in the shadows and my blood turned to absolute ice. Dementia, paranoia, specialized medical care facility. The $80,000 they stole was just the beginning. They were not just draining my emergency fund to pay off their hidden debts. They were actively building a fake paper trail to have me declared legally incompetent. They had found a dirty, corrupt doctor to sign a fake medical document, all so they could lock me away in a nursing home against my will and bleed my entire estate dry. They really thought I was a senile, helpless fool who would just vanish quietly into the night while they stole my life. I took a deep breath. I smoothed the collar of my faded jacket, squared my shoulders, and walked directly toward the glass office. My footsteps were silent on the carpeted floor, but my presence was heavy. I stopped right in the open doorway of the office. "I must say, Amber," I spoke. My voice was low, steady, and completely calm. For a man with severe dementia, I managed to find my way downtown in the rain pretty well today. Terrence whipped around so fast he almost lost his balance. All the color drained from his face in an instant. He looked like he had just seen a ghost. "Dad," he choked out, his voice cracking. Amber froze completely. Her hand hovered in the air above the fake medical document she had just slammed on the desk. Her jaw dropped open, but no words came out. The arrogance, the volume, the fake tears she had at the dinner table were completely gone. She stared at me, her eyes wide with absolute panic. I did not yell. I did not curse. I walked right up to the desk, standing shoulder to shoulder with the son who had just tried to sell my freedom. I looked down at the paper. A fake diagnosis, a fake signature, a plan to put me away. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I did not pull out an old worn-out wallet. I pulled out a solid metal obsidian black platinum card. A card that is only issued to top-tier private wealth clients with 8-figure portfolios. A card that Terrence and Amber did not even know existed. I let it slip from my fingers. It hit the glass desk with a heavy, sharp, unmistakable clink. It landed right on top of their fake medical certificate. "Mr. Davis," I said, looking directly at the bank manager, pointing at the black card. "My name is Desmond Holloway. I am a top-tier private wealth client at this institution. The account they are asking about is a petty cash fund, but the rest of my portfolio is managed upstairs in your corporate division." The manager looked at the black card, recognized what it was immediately, and stood up straight, his entire demeanor changing to absolute respect. "Yes, Mr. Holloway," the manager said quickly. "How can I assist you today, sir?" "These two individuals," I continued, my voice cold as steel, "are attempting to use forged medical documents to gain unauthorized access to a frozen account. They are falsely claiming I have dementia to bypass security protocols. I want you to pick up your phone right now and call the Federal Fraud Investigation Bureau. Tell them we have a textbook case of attempted bank fraud, document forgery, and elder abuse sitting right here in your office." Panic. Pure, unadulterated panic washed over Amber's face. The reality of what she had just done crashed down on her. She snatched the fake medical certificate out from under my black card with trembling hands and shoved it frantically into her purse. "Terrence, we need to leave," she stammered, her voice high-pitched and terrified. She was practically hyperventilating. "Right now. We have to go right now." Terrence looked at me. His eyes were wide with fear and deep confusion. He looked at the heavy black metal card resting on the desk, and then he looked back up at my worn-out flannel shirt. He was finally slowly starting to realize that he never really knew the man who raised him. He realized that the poor, helpless old man he thought he was bullying was actually a ghost. "Dad, please, I can explain everything," Terrence whispered, taking a step toward me, his hands raised in surrender. "Save your breath for the federal agents, son," I replied coldly, not breaking eye contact. "Now get out of my sight before I have the security guards lock the doors and hold you here until the police arrive." They did not wait for another warning. Amber grabbed Terrence by the sleeve of his expensive coat and pulled him violently toward the exit. They practically ran out of the bank office, stumbling over their own feet, pushing blindly past the confused customers in the lobby. I watched them scramble frantically through the heavy glass doors and disappear into the rainy gray street. The bank manager stared at the empty doorway for a moment, breathing heavily before looking back down at the black metal card and then back up at my face. I pulled out one of the comfortable leather guest chairs, sat down smoothly, and crossed my legs. I looked at the manager with a polite, professional smile. "Now, Mr. Davis," I said calmly, "let us talk about securing the rest of my assets." The Tuesday morning following the bank incident, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m. It was not Terrence. It was not the bank manager. It was my lawyer, Marcus Sterling. Marcus is a sharp, ruthless attorney I have kept on retainer for 15 years. He does not call before sunrise unless a building is burning down or a massive lawsuit is being filed. I answered the phone. Marcus did not say good morning. He just told me to turn on my computer and look at the link he just sent me. I opened my laptop and clicked the link. It took me to a social media app, TikTok. I do not use social media, but I know how the game is played. The video on my screen had over 2 million views. And sitting right in the center of the frame, looking directly into the camera with red, puffy eyes, was my daughter-in-law, Amber. She had set the scene perfectly. She was sitting on the floor of her expensive living room wearing an oversized plain gray sweater instead of her usual designer clothes. Her hair was messy. She wore no makeup. She looked small, fragile, and utterly terrified. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Amber spoke to her 50,000 followers with a trembling voice. She told them a story about a family in crisis. She told them about her father-in-law, me. She wiped away a single, perfectly timed tear and looked into the lens. She said, "I never thought I would have to make a video like this, but I am terrified for my safety and my family. My husband's father has been living with us. We have tried to give him everything. We tried to get him medical help because his mind is slipping. He is suffering from severe dementia. But yesterday he became violent. He cornered us at the bank when we were just trying to pay for his medical facility. He was aggressive. He was out of control. I am just so scared of what he might do next to me or my husband." I sat in the silence of my penthouse and watched this 34-year-old white woman weaponize her tears against a 71-year-old black man. She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew the history of this country. She knew the stereotypes. She knew that society is hardwired to protect a crying, fragile white woman and to fear an angry, unpredictable black man. She was painting me as a violent, deranged threat to cover up her own crimes. She was using her platform to bury me under a mountain of public outrage so that no one would ever believe a word I said. The consequences were immediate and vicious. The comment section under her video was an absolute war zone. Thousands of strangers were calling for my arrest. People were telling her to get a restraining order. They were calling me a monster, a parasite, an abuser. But the digital world quickly bled into my real life. Later that morning, I walked down to the coffee shop on the ground floor of my building, a place I have been going to for 3 years. The barista, a young woman who usually greets me with a bright smile, completely avoided my eyes. She handed me my black coffee with trembling hands and quickly stepped back. A couple sitting at a table near the window whispered to each other and pointed their phones in my direction. They recognized me. Amber had made sure to include my full name and a picture of me in her subsequent posts. She wanted to isolate me. She wanted to make me a pariah in my own city. She thought that by turning the world against me, I would crawl into a hole and hide, too ashamed and too broken to fight back. And where was Terrence during all of this? My son, the boy I carried on my shoulders, the man whose college tuition I paid for with my own sweat and blood. He was entirely silent. He let his wife broadcast a dangerous, defamatory lie to millions of people. He let her paint his own father as a violent, deranged criminal just to protect their stolen money and their fake lifestyle. That silence broke whatever was left of my paternal instinct. Terrence was no longer my son. He was just an accomplice. I did not go on the internet to defend myself. I did not post a video explaining my side of the story. Lions do not argue with hyenas. They just wait for the right moment to strike. I finished my coffee, threw the cup in the trash, and walked straight to the corporate offices of my lawyer, Marcus Sterling. When I walked into his spacious corner office, Marcus was pacing back and forth across his expensive rug. He was furious. He had a whole team of paralegals printing out screenshots of Amber's video, her comments, and her followers' direct threats against me. Desmond, Marcus said, pointing fiercely at the stack of papers on his desk. This is a slam-dunk defamation case. This is libel, slander, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We can file a lawsuit by noon. We can hit her with a massive cease and desist order. We can take her to civil court and strip away every single asset she claims to own. We can have her social media accounts shut down today. I walked over to the leather guest chair, sat down smoothly, and calmly smoothed the creases of my denim pants. I looked at Marcus. My face was completely devoid of emotion. No, I said quietly. We are not going to sue her for defamation. Marcus stopped pacing. He stared at me like I had lost my mind. Desmond, she is destroying your reputation. She is painting you as a violent threat. You cannot just let her get away with this. I am not letting her get away with anything, Marcus, I replied. But you do not swat a fly with a sledgehammer, and you do not fight a lie with a press release. If we sue her for defamation right now, she plays the victim card again. She goes back on camera and cries about the rich, abusive father-in-law using expensive lawyers to silence her truth. She wants a public fight. She wants drama. I am not going to give her that satisfaction. Then what exactly are we going to do? Marcus asked, leaning his hands against his heavy desk. I leaned forward. I want you to completely ignore her social media. Let her talk. Let her cry. Let her build her audience. Let her feel absolutely safe and victorious. Because while she is busy looking at her phone screen, I want you and your forensic accounting team to look at her business. Marcus narrowed his eyes, starting to see the invisible lines I was drawing. Amber runs a boutique Pilates and wellness studio in the Buckhead district, I explained. It is a high-end place, expensive equipment, a very pricey commercial lease. She just opened it 8 months ago. Funny enough, 8 months ago is exactly when $80,000 started disappearing from my joint account. I watched the realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. I do not care about her internet followers, I told him. I care about her cash flow. I want a complete microscopic forensic investigation into every single dollar that went into opening that studio. I want to know who holds the lease. I want to know who the silent investors are. I want to know what bank approved her business loan, and most importantly, what collateral she put down to get it. Because a woman drowning in personal debt does not just magically open a luxury fitness studio without committing serious financial fraud. Marcus slowly sat down in his leather chair. A dangerous, predatory smile spread across his face. You think she used your stolen money to fund the studio? Marcus asked. I know she did, I replied. But $80,000 is not enough to open a place like that in Buckhead. She needed at least $500,000 just to get the doors open, which means she lied on her loan applications. She probably forged documents, and she probably used something massive as collateral, something she does not actually own. I stood up and looked out the massive window at the Atlanta skyline. Amber wants to be a star, I said softly. She wants everyone to look at her and pity her. So let us give her exactly what she wants. Let her climb as high as she possibly can on her mountain of lies. Because the higher she climbs, the harder the impact will be when I completely shatter the foundation she is standing on. Find the money, Marcus. Track every single dime. Marcus nodded, pulling the fresh legal pad toward him. Consider it done, Desmond. We will tear her financial life apart piece by piece. I walked out of the law office feeling a profound sense of calm. Let the neighbors whisper. Let the strangers on the internet hurl their uneducated insults. They only knew the illusion Amber had carefully crafted for them. They had no idea that a massive, unavoidable storm was gathering right beneath her feet. She wanted to play the victim to save her pride. I was going to make sure she lost her business, her freedom, and everything she had ever tried to steal from me. The Wednesday evening sun was dipping below the Atlanta skyline, casting a golden glow through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse. I was standing there enjoying the rare moment of quiet when the intercom on my heavy oak desk chimed sharply. I walked over and pressed the silver button. It was Marcus, the young man who worked the concierge desk in the main lobby. His voice sounded strained and slightly panicked. "Mr. Holloway, I am so sorry to disturb you, sir. There is a couple down here. An older white man and woman. They bypassed the security gate and are being extremely aggressive with the staff. They are demanding to be led up to your residence. They claim they are your family and are threatening to call the police if we do not grant them immediate access." I knew exactly who it was without him having to say their names. Richard and Susan, Amber's parents. My first instinct was to tell Marcus to call building security and have them physically thrown out onto the street. But my second instinct, the one that had guided me through 40 years of ruthless business negotiations, told me to pause. You never learn your enemy's true strategy by shutting the door in their face. You invite them in, you let them talk, and you let their boundless arrogance dig a hole they can never climb out of. "Send them up, Marcus," I said calmly. I stood near the center of the living room and waited. A few minutes later, the chime of the private elevator echoed through the foyer and the steel doors slid open. Richard and Susan stepped out completely uninvited, ready to wage war. For a brief, deeply satisfying moment, I watched the absolute shock wash over their faces. They had come here expecting to find me hiding in some rundown motel room or a cheap, gloomy rental. Instead, they stepped onto imported Italian marble. Their eyes darted wildly, taking in the crystal chandeliers, the modern art on the walls, and the sheer, breathtaking scale of a 5,000-square-foot penthouse in the absolute center of the financial district. Susan's mouth actually fell open. She clutched her expensive designer handbag tightly against her chest, her eyes wide with disbelief. Richard swallowed hard, his face turning a slight shade of red as his brain struggled to process what he was seeing. But arrogance is a very stubborn disease. It did not take long for his deeply ingrained sense of superiority to override his confusion. He quickly rearranged his features into a familiar, condescending sneer, convincing himself of a narrative that fit his narrow worldview. "Well," Richard said, stepping fully into the living room without asking permission, "I suppose this explains where all the stolen money went. It is truly amazing what a person can rent when they drain their own son's accounts and hide from their responsibilities. I did not offer them a seat. I did not offer them a drink. I just stood there with my hands resting casually in the pockets of my tailored trousers." "How did you find this place, Richard?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly flat and devoid of emotion. Richard smirked, unbuttoning his suit jacket as if he owned the room. "You really think you can hide from us, Desmond? When my daughter called me in tears because you terrorized her at the bank, I hired a private investigator. It took him less than 48 hours to track you down. You might think you are clever hiding out in a luxury rental trying to play the big shot, but you are completely out of your depth." Susan stepped forward, crossing her arms tightly. "We know you are not well, Desmond," she said, using that same fake, sugary tone she used to insult me at the Thanksgiving dinner table. "Amber told us everything about your cognitive decline. We know you have been acting out, becoming violent, taking money that does not belong to you. We are here to intervene before you hurt yourself or our daughter any further." They were really sticking to the script. Even standing in the middle of a multi-million-dollar penthouse, they were so blinded by their own prejudice that they literally could not comprehend that an old black man like me could actually own it. They had convinced themselves I was a crazy, poor old man squatting in luxury on their daughter's dime. I slowly took my right hand out of my pocket, but I left my left hand deep inside. My fingers wrapped around the small digital voice recorder I always kept on my person. With a subtle, silent press of my thumb, the red light turned on. I was recording every single word. "Why are you really here, Richard?" I asked. "Cut the act. You did not hire an expensive private investigator just to check on my health." Richard dropped the fake, polite smile. His face grew hard, cold, and entirely ruthless. He took a heavy step closer to me, trying to use his height to intimidate me. But I had spent 4 decades dealing with cutthroat contractors, corrupt officials, and union bosses. A soft-handed country club executive was not going to make me flinch. I am here to fix the mess you created, Richard said, his voice dropping to a threatening growl. My daughter's reputation is taking a hit because of your little stunts. Terrence is a weak man who cannot handle his own household, but Amber is my blood. I will not let a stubborn, washed-up old man drag her down. He reached into his tailored jacket and pulled out a thick, folded legal document. He tossed it onto my glass coffee table with a loud smack. Here is how this is going to work, Mr. Holloway, Richard said, leaning aggressively over the table. You are going to sign that deed right now. You are going to legally transfer full ownership of your Baldwin Hills house over to Terrence and Amber today. You are going to sign away all your rights to the property, and then you are going to walk away quietly and never bother them again. I looked down at the document on the table, then back up at Richard. And if I refuse? Susan let out a dramatic, exaggerated sigh. Oh, Desmond, please do not make this harder than it has to be. If you force our hand, we will have absolutely no choice but to protect Amber by any means necessary. Richard nodded, a malicious glint shining in his eye. If you do not sign that house over right now, my lawyers will file a massive civil suit against you by tomorrow morning. We will sue you for the emotional abuse and psychological distress you have inflicted on my daughter. We will use her viral social media videos. We will use the medical records she has gathered. And we will drag your name through the absolute mud. We will tie you up in court for years until you are completely bankrupt. He pointed a finger directly at my chest. People like you need to learn to know their place. Richard spat, the ugly elitist undertone of his words completely unhidden now. You were lucky my daughter even let you sit at her dining table. You are nothing but a burden. Sign the house over and we let you disappear in peace. Fight us, and I will make sure a judge declares you mentally incompetent and locks you in a state-run facility for the rest of your miserable life. The silence in the penthouse was profound. The sheer audacity, the staggering entitlement of these people was breathtaking. They had marched into my home, insulted my intelligence, threatened my freedom, and attempted to extort me out of a house I bought with my own hard-earned money. And they had just confessed to all of it on a digital recording. Extortion, blackmail, conspiracy to commit medical fraud. My thumb brushed against the stop button on the recorder inside my pocket, securing the file. I had everything I needed. They had just delivered the final nail for their own coffins on a silver platter. I looked at Richard. I looked at Susan. I did not scream. I did not raise my voice or throw them out by their collars. I simply smiled. It was a cold, empty smile that did not reach my eyes. I walked over to the glass coffee table. I picked up the folded deed transfer document. I looked at it for a brief second, and then I slowly, deliberately tore it in half. Then I tore the halves into quarters. I let the shredded pieces of paper fall like snow onto the imported rug. Richard's face turned purple with rage. "Are you deaf, old man?" he shouted, dropping the polite facade entirely. "Did you not hear a single word I just said? I will destroy you. I will take everything you have." I looked Richard dead in the eye. My voice was dangerously quiet, cutting through his shouting like a razor blade. "Do what you think is right, Richard," I said. Susan gasped, grabbing her husband's arm in panic. "Richard, let us go. He has completely lost his mind. There is no talking to him." I stepped aside and gestured toward the elevator. "You know the way out," I told them, "and I suggest you tell your daughter to enjoy her Pilates studio while she still can, because the weather in Atlanta is about to change very drastically." Richard glared at me, his chest heaving with anger. "You are going to regret this, Desmond. You are going to die with nothing." He turned around and stormed into the elevator with Susan close behind him. The doors slid shut, hiding their furious faces from my sight. I stood alone in the quiet penthouse. I pulled the recorder out of my pocket and looked at the glowing red screen. I had let them walk away feeling powerful. I let them believe they were the predators, and I was just cornered prey. But they had no idea that they had just walked blindly into a trap. I walked over to my desk and picked up my phone. It was time to load the next round. The city of Atlanta never truly sleeps, but from the top floor of my penthouse, it usually feels like a silent and distant world. It was approaching 1 a.m. The rain from earlier had stopped leaving the streets slick and reflecting the amber glow of the streetlights. I was sitting in my study nursing a glass of sparkling water, reviewing the financial reports Marcus had prepared for me. My mind was heavy with the events of the past few days. I was ready to systematically dismantle the comfortable lives Terrence and Amber had built on my back. But nothing could have prepared me for what was about to happen next. The security intercom on my desk buzzed loudly, shattering the quiet of the room. I pressed the button. The night guard downstairs sounded hesitant. He told me there was a young girl in the lobby. She was soaking wet, shivering, and refusing to speak to anyone except Desmond Holloway. He said she claimed to be my granddaughter. My heart immediately dropped into my stomach. I told him to send her up to the penthouse this instant. A few minutes later, the private elevator chimed. The doors slid open, and there stood Maya. She is 16 years old, Terrence's daughter from his first marriage. Her mother, a beautiful and kind black woman, had passed away when Maya was just a toddler. Since Terrence married Amber, Maya had always been the odd one out in that house. She was a brilliant, observant, deeply soulful black girl, trapped in a house run by a white stepmother who cared more about beige aesthetics and country club appearances than she did about raising a child. Maya looked exhausted. Her dark hair was damp, her sneakers were muddy, and she was clutching her backpack to her chest like it was a shield. She looked at the marble floors, the crystal chandeliers, and the sheer size of the penthouse with wide, confused eyes. She did not know about my wealth either. To her, I was just Grandpa Desmond, the man who brought her favorite peach cobbler on Sundays and slipped her a $20 bill when her parents were not looking. I did not explain the apartment. I just rushed over, wrapped a warm cashmere blanket around her shoulders, and led her to the kitchen. I made her a cup of hot cocoa the way I used to when she was little. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the mug. I asked her how she got here so late. She told me she took a rideshare car, paying for it with the emergency cash I had given her months ago. She said things at the house had become unbearable since the night of the Thanksgiving dinner. Amber had been screaming at Terrence non-stop. Terrence was drinking heavily in his home office. The fake, perfect image they projected to the world had completely collapsed behind closed doors. Amber was taking all her anger out on Maya, snapping at her, treating her like an unwanted burden, and blaming her for the stress in the house. But Maya did not brave the cold, dark streets of Atlanta just to tell me her parents were fighting. She set her mug down on the granite counter and unzipped her damp backpack. "Grandpa," she said, her voice trembling but filled with a fierce determination, "I know they did something terrible to you. I heard them talking. They think you are old and confused, but I know you are the smartest man I have ever met. I saw Amber throwing things away in her home office today. She was frantic. She was tearing up papers and shoving them into the bottom of her trash can. When she left for her Pilates studio, I dug them out." Maya pulled a thick, crumpled stack of papers from her bag and pushed them across the counter toward me. She had spent hours piecing them back together with clear tape. "I saw your name on them, Grandpa," she whispered. "I knew I had to bring them to you." I put on my reading glasses and smoothed the papers out under the bright kitchen lights. I began to read through the heavy legal jargon. My blood began to run cold, and the sheer magnitude of their desperation finally became clear. These were not standard bank documents. They were an application for a hard money loan. Hard money lenders are predatory. They are essentially legal loan sharks who cater to desperate people who have been rejected by traditional banks. They charge exorbitant interest rates, sometimes 20 or 30%, and they require massive collateral. If you miss even one payment, they do not negotiate. They immediately seize your property. Amber was trying to secure a loan for $1.5 million to save her failing business and pay off Terrence's gambling debts. And the collateral she was listing on the application was my home, the house in Baldwin Hills, the house I had paid off 30 years ago. I kept reading. In order to use my house as collateral, Amber had to prove that the title was being transferred to her and Terrence. Since they had failed to bully me into signing the deed over, she was attempting to bypass me entirely. She was submitting a fake transfer of deed to the predatory lender. I flipped to the final page of the application, the page where the signatures were required. There at the bottom was my name, Desmond Holloway, forged in blue ink. It was the same sloppy forgery I had seen on the withdrawal slips from my emergency bank account. But it was the signature right next to mine that made the entire room spin. There, signed in a delicate cursive script, was the name Vivian Holloway, my wife, Maya's grandmother. Vivian had been dead for 5 long years. I stared at that signature, and the silence in the penthouse became deafening. Vivian and I built our lives from nothing. When we were young, she used to bake pies and sell them at the local market just so we could afford to buy the first delivery truck for my business. She scrubbed floors, she managed the books, she held my hand when we had nothing but lint in our pockets. We bought that house in Baldwin Hills together. It was our first real piece of the American dream. Amber, a woman who had never worked a hard day in her entire life, a woman who looked down on us for being simple, had dug through my old files. She had found a document with Vivian's handwriting, and she had sat at her expensive desk tracing the signature of a dead black woman using a ghost to commit federal fraud so she could fund her luxury lifestyle. Something inside of me snapped. The sound of it was loud and final. Up until this very moment, everything I had planned was just a lesson. I was going to freeze my accounts. I was going to let Terrence and Amber face their creditors. I was going to let them taste the poverty they were so terrified of, just to teach them some respect and humility. I wanted to discipline a wayward son and his greedy, arrogant wife. But touching Vivian was crossing the bloodline. Using my dead wife's name to steal the home she built with her own 2 hands was a desecration. Maya looked up at my face and gasped. She reached out and touched my arm. "Grandpa," she whispered, her voice full of fear. "You look so angry." I looked down at the beautiful, brave 16-year-old girl sitting in my kitchen, the only person in that entire house who had an ounce of integrity. My eyes, which had always looked at my family with patience and forgiveness, were now completely devoid of warmth. The temperature in my soul had dropped to absolute 0. "I am not angry, Maya," I said softly, my voice dangerously calm. "Anger is for people who do not have a plan." I gathered the taped papers, the ultimate proof of their unforgivable sin, and placed them carefully into a leather folder. "You are not going back to that house," I told her gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You are going to stay right here with me. You will have your own room, your own bathroom, and anything else you need. Tomorrow my lawyers will begin the process of transferring your legal custody. Terrence is not fit to be a father, and Amber is not fit to be around you." Maya let out a shaky breath, tears of relief spilling over her eyelashes. She hugged me tightly, burying her face in my shoulder. I held her close, promising her that the nightmare she had been living in was finally over. I sent her to one of the guest bedrooms to sleep, making sure she was comfortable and safe. Then I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the sprawling city of Atlanta. There was no more holding back. There was no more teaching them a lesson. They wanted to play a game of survival, but they forgot who built the arena. I was going to take everything from them. I was going to rip the ground out from under their feet, expose their crimes to the world, and watch as the life they cared so much about crumbled into dust. They thought they were dealing with an old, helpless man. They were about to meet the monster they created. The morning after Maya arrived at my penthouse started with a sound that changes a man's life forever. A heavy, authoritative pounding on my front door. It was barely 7 in the morning. Maya was still fast asleep in the guest room, exhausted from the trauma of the night before. I set my black coffee down on the granite counter and walked toward the foyer. My concierge does not let anyone up without my direct approval. But when I looked through the security monitor, I saw 2 uniformed Atlanta police officers standing in my hallway. I opened the door. The taller officer looked at a clipboard in his hand, then looked up at me. He did not look aggressive, just entirely strictly professional. "Are you Desmond Holloway?" he asked. I told him I was. He handed me a thick, heavy manila envelope. "You have been formally served, sir," he said. He did not offer any explanation. He just turned around and walked back to the elevator with his partner. I closed the heavy oak door. The envelope felt unnaturally heavy in my hands, like it was filled with lead. I walked back to the kitchen island, sat on the bar stool, and tore open the seal. I pulled out a stack of legal documents stamped with the official seal of the Fulton County Probate Court. I put on my reading glasses. I read the bold black letters at the top of the first page. Petition for emergency guardianship and conservatorship. The petitioner was listed as Terrence Holloway. The respondent was me. I read through the pages, and the air in the room suddenly felt incredibly thin. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears. This was not a lawsuit for money. This was an execution. A legal, quiet, completely clinical assassination of my entire existence. Terrence was officially petitioning the court to declare his own father mentally incompetent. He was asking a judge to strip me of all my civil rights, every single one. I read the sworn affidavit attached to the petition. It was filled with the most vicious, calculated lies I had ever seen in my 71 years of living. Terrence claimed that I was suffering from severe advanced dementia and acute paranoia. He claimed I was prone to violent, uncontrollable outbursts. He stated that I was incapable of managing my own finances, my own personal hygiene, or my own daily schedule. He attached the fake medical certificate from that corrupt doctor he and Amber had bribed. He attached transcripts of Amber's viral social media videos using the outrage of thousands of internet strangers as proof that I was a public menace. They had taken my silence and my departure from their Thanksgiving dinner and twisted it into a narrative of an old deranged man running wild in the streets. But it was the bottom of the petition that made my blood run absolutely cold. Terrence was requesting full unrestricted control over my medical decisions and my financial estate. He was asking the court to grant him the power to forcefully relocate me to a secure memory care facility. I put the papers down on the cold granite. My hands were shaking, not from old age, from a deep, suffocating terror that I had not felt since I was a young black boy growing up in the segregated South. If a judge signed this piece of paper, I would become a ghost, a ward of the state. I would lose the right to sign a check to vote to drive my truck or to even choose what I wanted to eat for breakfast. Terrence and Amber would have the legal authority to walk into this penthouse with police officers, drag me out against my will, and lock me inside a nursing home. And I knew exactly what kind of nursing home they would choose. They would not put me in a place with gardens and attentive nurses. They would put me in one of those cold, sterile facilities hidden away on the outskirts of the city. A place where the staff is overworked and underpaid. A place where they deal with difficult patients by pumping them full of heavy sedatives and antipsychotics. They would chemically restrain me. They would drug me into a drooling, silent, vegetative state just to keep me sitting in a wheelchair staring at a blank wall until my heart finally gave out. While I sat locked in a chemical prison, Terrence and Amber would be granted full access to everything I owned. They would find my secret accounts. They would liquidate my $20 million portfolio. They would sell the commercial warehouses I built with my bare hands. They would take the house Vivian and I bought. They would take it all, pay off their loan sharks, save Amber's pathetic boutique studio, and live like royalty on the blood and sweat of my entire life. The sheer cruelty of it was paralyzing. A son looking at his father and deciding to bury him alive just to get to his wallet. The walls of the massive penthouse suddenly felt like they were closing in on me. The ceiling felt low. The beautiful view of the Atlanta skyline felt like a painting I was no longer allowed to look at. I thought about Maya sleeping in the next room. If they won this case, I would not be able to protect her. She would be dragged back into that toxic house raised by a cowardly father and a venomous stepmother. She would become the scapegoat for all their failures. I would lose her. I would lose everything. For exactly 1 minute, I let the despair wash over me. I let the reality of the American legal system sink in. I am an old black man, in a courtroom facing a crying, well-dressed white woman and a son claiming to be a concerned caretaker. The odds are terrifyingly stacked against me. The system is designed to process people like me quickly and quietly. The system loves a neat, tragic narrative. But then the minute passed. The fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard, unyielding fury. I closed my eyes and pictured Vivian. I pictured the calluses on her hands. I pictured the years I spent lifting heavy crates in the freezing rain so Terrence could have a warm bed. I remembered the man I was. I did not build an empire by rolling over and surrendering to bullies. I picked up my phone. I dialed Marcus Sterling. He answered on the first ring. "Marcus," I said, my voice steady and dark. "They just dropped the bomb. They served me with a petition for emergency guardianship. They are trying to declare me legally incompetent. They want to lock me in a facility and take the wheel." I heard Marcus curse under his breath. A sharp, violent sound. "How long do we have Desmond?" "The emergency hearing is scheduled for this Friday," I told him. 3 days. 3 days, Marcus repeated. His voice went into full battle mode. "That means they are trying to rush this past a judge before you have time to mount a medical defense. They want to blindside you. Desmond, this is a legal assassination attempt. If we walk into that courtroom unprepared, you will not walk out a free man. They will take you straight from the courthouse to a locked ward." "Then we do not walk in unprepared," I replied. "I want you to mobilize every resource, every paralegal, and every forensic accountant on your payroll. I want to bring a storm into that courtroom that they have never seen before." "I will handle the legal filings," Marcus said quickly. "But Desmond, we need immediate bulletproof medical evidence. We need to counter their fake doctor right now." "I am leaving the penthouse right now," I told him. "I am going to get exactly what we need. When I see my son on Friday, I am not just going to defend my sanity. I am going to completely obliterate his entire world." I hung up the phone. The desperation was gone. The game of teaching them a lesson was officially over. This was a fight for my actual life. I grabbed my keys, put on my faded denim jacket, and walked out the door. I stood in the elevator as it descended to the lobby, my reflection staring back at me in the polished steel doors. I looked at the wrinkles around my eyes and the gray in my beard. Terrence looked at these features and saw weakness. He saw an expiration date. He saw an opportunity to cash in a ticket he never earned. He forgot that the wrinkles came from surviving a world that tried to crush me every single day. He forgot that the gray hair was earned by outsmarting men 10 times more ruthless than him and his little wife combined. The doors opened to the lobby. The valet brought my old Ford truck around. The engine roared as I turned the ignition. I drove out into the morning traffic of Atlanta. The sky was still gray, but my mind was crystal clear. 3 days. I had 72 hours to gather the ammunition necessary to stop a legal bulldozer. 72 hours to prove that I was not a fragile, broken old man, but a predator who had just been handed the keys to the slaughterhouse. Let them prepare their fake tears for the judge. I was bringing the truth, and the truth was going to burn their house to the ground. I did not waste a single second. When someone is trying to steal your mind on paper, you do not just get a second opinion. You build a fortress of undeniable medical facts. I spent the next 48 hours undergoing the most grueling, invasive cognitive examinations available in the state of Georgia. Marcus used his connections to get me emergency appointments with 3 of the most respected independent board-certified psychiatrists in the country. These were not strip mall doctors you could bribe with a thick envelope of cash. These were department heads at major university hospitals, men and women whose expert testimonies had sent serial killers to prison and dismantled massive corporate frauds. I made sure they tested absolutely everything. I demanded blood panels, neurological mapping, and deep psychological evaluations. I sat in those sterile, bright white offices and answered thousands of questions. I solved complex mathematical equations in my head. I recited long sequences of numbers backwards. I took spatial reasoning tests and memory retention exams. I let them look into every single corner of my 71-year-old brain. I wanted zero margin for error. If Terrence was going to walk into a courtroom and claim I was a confused, helpless old man, I was going to provide federal-level proof that my mind was a steel trap. By Thursday afternoon, I walked out of the 3rd hospital with 3 heavily sealed, notarized envelopes. Inside were comprehensive psychiatric evaluations from 3 separate, highly decorated doctors. All of them stated unequivocally and under penalty of perjury that Desmond Holloway possessed superior cognitive function, 0 signs of dementia, and complete capacity to manage his personal and financial affairs. They even noted that my stress responses were incredibly well managed for a man my age. Their fake medical certificate was now entirely worthless. It was nothing but a piece of trash compared to the mountain of hard medical evidence I held in my hands. I drove my truck straight from the hospital to Marcus Sterling's law firm. I walked past the receptionist and pushed open the heavy oak doors to his private corner office. Marcus was sitting at his massive conference table, completely surrounded by stacks of financial documents, bank records, and corporate filings. He had 3 of his top forensic accountants in the room with him. They all looked up when I walked in. They looked exhausted, but Marcus had a sharp smile on his face. It was the look of a predator smelling blood in the water. "Have a seat," Desmond Marcus said, tapping a thick file folder resting in the center of the table. "We found it. We found the absolute bottom of the rabbit hole. And I am telling you right now, it is so much worse than we originally thought." I sat down and placed my 3 medical envelopes on the table. "Tell me everything," I said. Marcus opened the folder. "That $80,000 they stole from your emergency fund, that was just pocket change, Desmond. That was just them desperately trying to plug holes in a sinking ship. We dug into Amber's boutique Pilates studio, the one she loves bragging about on the internet, the one that makes her look like a self-made, successful, high-society businesswoman. It is a complete and total financial mirage." The lead accountant, a sharp-looking woman with wire-rimmed glasses, slid a printed spreadsheet across the polished wood toward me. "Amber does not own that studio, Mr. Holloway," she explained. "She is drowning in catastrophic debt. To open a luxury facility in the Buckhead district, to buy the imported equipment, and to pay for her expensive public relations campaigns, she took out massive loans. But traditional banks rejected her because her personal credit was already garbage. So she went to private equity. She went to aggressive venture capital funds." "How much?" I asked, my voice completely steady. $1.5 million, Marcus answered, leaning forward, interlacing his fingers. She owes $1.5 million in high-yield short-term commercial debt, and the monthly payments are suffocating them. That is why Terrence has been stealing from you. That is why they tried to forge your dead wife's signature on a hard money loan application. They are about to default completely. If they do not come up with a massive injection of cash by the end of this month, the creditors are going to seize the studio, seize their personal assets, and bankrupt them. Marcus slammed his hand on the table. They are trying to declare you mentally incompetent so they can legally liquidate your entire portfolio to save her pathetic, failing business. I stared at the staggering numbers on the spreadsheet. $1.5 million. My son, the boy I raised, to understand the value of hard work and honesty, had allowed his wife to dig $1 million grave. And their brilliant plan to climb out of it was to throw me inside and bury me alive. The sheer scale of their greed was breathtaking. They were not just terrible, selfish family members. They were financial criminals masquerading as wealthy suburban elites. Who holds the debt? I asked, looking up at Marcus. Who gave a woman with bad credit a $1.5 million commercial loan? Marcus flipped to the last page of the contract. It is a private venture capital firm that specializes in high-risk commercial real estate and business acquisitions. They are notoriously ruthless, Desmond. If Amber defaults, they will not negotiate a payment plan. They will strip her bare and take everything she has. The firm is called Vanguard Legacy. Vanguard Legacy. The name hung in the quiet, air-conditioned atmosphere of the law office. Marcus and his accountants kept looking at the papers, completely unaware of the absolute magnitude of what they had just said. I did not gasp. I did not widen my eyes in shock. I simply looked down at my rough, calloused hands. The hands that had poured concrete. The hands that had loaded freight in the freezing rain. The hands that had quietly built an invisible empire over 40 years. Vanguard Legacy. A slow, chilling realization settled deep into my bones. I let out a low, quiet hum. It was the sound a man makes when he realizes the universe has a very dark, very poetic sense of justice. Are you familiar with them? Desmond Marcus asked, noticing my sudden, heavy silence. I looked up at my lawyer. My face was a mask of cold, unyielding stone. You could say that, Marcus. You could definitely say that. Do not worry about Vanguard Legacy. Let me handle them. You just focus on getting everything ready for the courtroom tomorrow morning. Marcus looked at me curiously but nodded. We have the forged documents. We have the proof of the stolen $80,000. We have her $1.5 million debt structure mapped out. And now, thanks to you, we have 3 bulletproof psychiatric evaluations proving you are entirely sane. We have all the ammunition we need, Desmond. When Terrence stands up in front of that judge tomorrow and tries to lock you away, we are going to blow his entire life to pieces. I stood up from the leather chair. I gathered my medical envelopes and tucked them neatly into the inside pocket of my jacket. I do not just want to win the case, Marcus, I said, walking toward the heavy oak doors. I want them to feel the exact same suffocating terror they tried to put on me. I want them to look around that courtroom and realize they brought a butter knife to a nuclear war. I walked out of the law office and stepped back into the bustling streets of Atlanta. The sun was shining brightly now. The gray clouds from the morning had completely cleared, leaving a sharp, crisp blue sky. I had my ammunition. I had the undeniable truth. And I had a secret so devastating, so perfectly destructive, that it was going to do much more than just save my freedom. Tomorrow was Friday. Tomorrow was the emergency guardianship hearing. Tomorrow I was going to look my son directly in the eye and officially end the charade. Tomorrow the quiet, poor old man in the faded denim jacket was going to die, and the predator who owned the city was going to take his seat. It was Thursday evening. The sun had already set over the sprawling city of Atlanta, leaving behind a dark, heavy sky. In less than 12 hours, I was scheduled to stand in front of a probate judge and fight against my own flesh and blood for the fundamental right to keep my freedom. I took the private elevator down to the subterranean parking garage of my building. I did not want to go anywhere in particular. I just wanted to sit inside my old Ford pickup truck for a while. The worn-out leather seats and the faint smell of motor oil reminded me of the days when my life was simple. The days when my wife Vivian was still alive and our son was just a boy who looked up to me. But as I walked across the cold concrete floor of the dimly lit garage, I saw a shadow separate itself from the concrete pillar next to my truck. It was Terrence. He was wearing an expensive designer overcoat, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He was shivering slightly in the damp basement air. He must have slipped past the security gate behind a resident's car and tracked my license plate. He looked exhausted. His eyes were bloodshot and his posture was slumped. He looked exactly like a man who knew he was standing on the edge of a massive cliff. I stopped a few feet away from him. The silence between us was thick and suffocating. For a brief, foolish moment, the heart of a father fluttered inside my chest. I thought that maybe, just maybe, the reality of what he was about to do had finally caught up with him. I thought he had come down here to beg for forgiveness, to call off the dogs, to tell me he was sorry for letting his arrogant wife drag my name through the mud. I reached into the pocket of my faded denim jacket, my fingers wrapped around the small digital voice recorder I had been carrying with me everywhere. I pressed my thumb against the tactile button. It vibrated once silently against my skin. The red recording light was on. I was ready. Terrence looked at me, his jaw tight. He did not say a word. He just stared at my old work boots, completely incapable of meeting my eyes. I decided to give him one last chance. One final, desperately extended olive branch. It was the absolute last test of his soul. "Tell the truth, son," I said. My voice was low, steady, and echoing in the empty garage. "Stop this madness right now. Drop the court petition. Call off your lawyers. Tell me why you are really doing this. Tell me about the money you stole, and if you just stop and walk away tonight, I will forgive you. I will not press criminal charges. We can figure something out. I am still your father." Terrence slowly lifted his head. He looked at me, and whatever faint hope I had left for his redemption evaporated instantly into the cold air. He did not look sorry. He did not look ashamed. He looked absolutely furious. He let out a short, bitter laugh that sounded like dry leaves scraping across pavement. "Forgive me," he scoffed, his voice dripping with an ugly, toxic resentment. "You think I came down into this freezing garage to beg for your forgiveness?" He took a step closer to me, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated entitlement, the mask of a man who had completely lost his grip on reality. "You just do not get it, Dad." Terrence spat, the anger finally boiling over. "You have never gotten it. You spent my entire life preaching to me about the value of a hard-earned dollar. You made me work in your sweltering warehouses. You made me scrub floors and load trucks while all my friends were out enjoying their youth. You told me that struggle builds character. You told me that as a black man in this world I had to work twice as hard just to get half as far." He pointed a shaking finger at my face. "Do you know what your precious character building got me?" he demanded, his voice rising in volume. "It got me laughed at. It got me looked down upon. When I met Amber, when I sat at the dinner table with Richard and Susan, do you know how small they made me feel? They handed Amber a brand new luxury car on her 16th birthday. They paid for her European vacations in cash. They gave her a massive down payment for our first house without even blinking an eye. They have generational wealth. They have power. And what did I have to offer? A father who drives a rusted-out piece of junk and wears the same flannel shirts he wore 20 years ago. You embarrassed me. You made me look like a charity case in front of the woman I love." I stood completely still. I did not interrupt him. I let the recorder in my pocket capture every single drop of venom spilling from his mouth. I stole that money because I deserved it. Terrence confessed, his eyes wild and completely devoid of guilt. "I took that $80,000 because you were just sitting on it. You were hoarding it in some useless emergency fund while I was drowning trying to keep up with Amber's lifestyle. I had to prove to her parents that I was not just some blue-collar charity project. I had to prove that I belonged in their world." He ran a hand over his face, breathing heavily, entirely convinced by his own twisted delusions. "And now," Terrence continued, his tone turning cold and clinical, "Amber needs real money. Her wellness studio is failing. The investors are threatening to take everything we have. We are completely out of options. And you are 71 years old. You live like a monk. What do you even need your house for? What do you need your savings for? To buy more cheap groceries? To pay for cable television?" He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You are old, Dad. You had your time. You and Mom lived your boring, simple little life, and now it is over. It is my turn. Amber needs that money to save her career. We need your assets to survive, so we are going to do whatever it takes." I looked at the man standing in front of me. I searched his face for any trace of the little boy who used to fall asleep on my chest while we watched baseball games. I searched for any resemblance to the kind, hard-working woman Vivian had been. But there was nothing left. The boy I raised was dead. He had been suffocated by his own massive insecurities and poisoned by his wife's endless greed. "We are going into that courtroom tomorrow morning," Terrence declared, pulling his designer coat tighter around his shoulders. "And we are going to win. We have the medical documents. Amber has the entire internet on her side. The judge is going to look at a crying, stressed-out young family dealing with a violent, confused old man, and they are going to hand me the absolute keys to your life. I just came here tonight to tell you to make it easy on yourself. Do not fight us tomorrow. Surrender. Accept your placement in the facility. If you go quietly, I promise I will make sure the nurses treat you well." The silence returned to the garage. It was heavier this time. It was the silence of a funeral. I slowly reached my hand into the pocket of my denim jacket. I pressed my thumb against the tactile button on the digital recorder. It vibrated once. The red light turned off. The recording was saved. I had the complete, undeniable confession of his financial theft, his malicious intent, and his coordinated plan to falsely imprison me. I pulled my hand out of my pocket. I looked at Terrence. For the first time in my entire life, I did not look at him with the eyes of a father. The warmth, the patience, the unconditional love that I had carried for 38 years officially died in that freezing concrete basement. My heart turned into a block of absolute ice. He was no longer my son. He was a parasite trying to feed on my corpse. He was an enemy combatant standing in the way of my survival. "You are absolutely right about one thing, Terrence," I said. My voice was so quiet, so devoid of any human emotion that it made him physically flinch. He blinked clearly, unnerved by my complete lack of outrage. "Right about what?" he asked, nervously. "You and I did not live in the same world," I replied, my eyes locking onto his with predatory intensity. "But you are vastly underestimating exactly which world I actually belong to. You think you are playing a game of chess with a blind man, but you do not even realize you are standing on a landmine." I turned around and walked over to the driver's side door of my old Ford truck. I unlocked it and pulled the heavy metal door open. I paused and looked over my shoulder at the pathetic, trembling man standing in the shadows. "Get a good night of sleep, Terrence," I said coldly. "Enjoy your expensive coat. Enjoy your wife's fake tears. Because tomorrow morning when we walk into that courtroom, I am going to take everything from you. I am going to leave you with absolutely nothing." I climbed into my truck, slammed the door shut, and started the engine. The loud roar of the motor drowned out whatever weak response Terrence tried to offer. I put the truck in gear and drove away, leaving him standing alone in the dark. The father was dead. The executioner had arrived, and the slaughter was scheduled for 9 in the morning. Friday morning arrived with a cold and heavy overcast sky hanging over the city of Atlanta. The Fulton County Courthouse was an imposing building made of thick concrete and marble floors. It was a place designed to make you feel small. I walked through the heavy wooden double doors of Courtroom 4B with my lawyer Marcus Sterling walking quietly right beside me. I was wearing my best tailored suit. It was a dark navy wool that fit me perfectly, but I made sure my posture remained relaxed and unimposing. I sat down at the defense table and folded my hands together, resting them gently on the smooth wood. Terrence and Amber were already seated at the petitioner table on the other side of the aisle. Amber had completely abandoned her usual flashy designer clothes. She was wearing a high-necked, pristine white dress that reached below her knees. Her hair was pulled back into a simple, modest ponytail. She wore absolutely no makeup. She looked pale, fragile, and utterly exhausted. It was a perfectly calculated wardrobe choice, designed to make her look like an innocent, terrified victim of circumstance. Terrence sat next to her wearing a soft blue sweater, looking like a broken and heartbroken son, carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Their lawyer stood up as the judge entered the room. He was a slick, expensive-looking man with a sharp haircut and a silver watch. Judge Harrison, an older white man with a serious face, took his seat at the high bench and called the emergency guardianship hearing to order. The slick lawyer approached the center of the room. He spoke with a soft and deeply mournful tone. He told the judge that this was an incredibly tragic case. He said it was the heartbreaking story of a beloved father and grandfather whose mind had been completely stolen by the ravages of severe dementia. He pointed a sympathetic hand in my direction. He painted me as a man who used to be a strong, hard-working provider, but was now a hollow, unpredictable shell of a human being. The lawyer claimed that my cognitive decline had accelerated so rapidly that I had become an immediate danger to myself and a terrifying burden to my loving son and daughter-in-law. He said that Terrence and Amber had tried everything in their power to care for me at home, but my behavior had escalated into severe violence. Then he called Amber to the witness stand. Amber walked slowly across the courtroom. Her shoulders were slumped and her hands were trembling visibly. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Then she sat down and began the absolute greatest performance of her entire life. She looked up at the judge with wide, tear-filled eyes. She said that the problem started out small. She claimed I was forgetting where I put my keys or leaving the front door wide open in the middle of the night. But then her voice cracked perfectly on cue. She said things got incredibly dark and dangerous over the last few months. Amber told the judge that I had started having severe paranoid hallucinations. She claimed that I would wake up at 2 in the morning and wander into her kitchen, smashing ceramic plates on the floor and screaming at people who were not actually there. She clutched a crumpled tissue in her hands, wiping away tears that flowed freely down her cheeks. She told the court that she was physically terrified of me. She leaned into every single ugly stereotype she could weaponize. She described me as a large, unpredictable black man who had completely lost his grip on reality. She said she had to install heavy locks on her bedroom door because I would allegedly pound on the wood for hours, demanding money that did not exist. She cried and said she could not sleep anymore because she was terrified I would forget who she was and attack her in the dark. I sat at the defense table and listened to this 34-year-old woman invent an absolute monster out of thin air. She was describing a horror movie villain to a judge who was hanging onto her every single word. My face did not move a single inch. My breathing remained perfectly steady. Marcus sat quietly next to me, writing meticulously on his yellow legal pad, not raising a single objection. We were letting her dig the hole as deep as she possibly could. Terrence kept his head down at his table, covering his face with his hands. He was playing the role of the devastated son who simply could not bear to hear the tragic truth about his father being spoken out loud. When Amber finished her crying, the slick lawyer approached the bench again. He handed Judge Harrison a thick manila folder. He announced to the courtroom that this was an official medical certificate from Dr. Evans. He called Dr. Evans a highly respected physician who had personally examined me. He read portions of the fake report out loud for the court record. The fake report detailed aggressive behavior, profound memory loss, and a total inability to manage my own basic life functions. The lawyer stated that Dr. Evans had diagnosed me with acute paranoia and advanced cognitive decline. He looked directly at the judge and stated that for my own safety and the safety of the general public, I needed to be instantly remanded to a secure psychiatric memory care facility. He argued that if I was allowed to walk out of the courthouse today, I would likely wander into traffic or severely injure a member of my own family. Judge Harrison looked down at the paperwork and nodded slowly. A look of deep, profound sympathy washed over his face. He looked at Amber and offered her a comforting smile. The trap was closing flawlessly around me, but they did not stop there. They wanted to crush me so completely that I would never see the light of day again. The slick lawyer called their next witness to the stand. A woman named Brenda Higgins walked into the courtroom. She was a neighbor who lived 2 houses down from Terrence. I knew Brenda. She was a neighborhood gossip who was constantly complaining about her credit card debts and her expensive car payments. Amber had clearly bought her loyalty with a portion of the $80,000 she stole from me. Brenda took the oath and sat in the witness chair. She looked directly at the judge and lied through her teeth without a single ounce of hesitation. Brenda testified that she had personally seen me wandering the suburban neighborhood in the freezing rain without a coat, looking completely lost and disoriented. She claimed she tried to approach me to help me find my way back to Terrence, but I became violently aggressive. She said I shouted horrible obscenities at her and threatened to hurt her if she came any closer. She took a dramatic breath and told the judge that she frequently heard loud, aggressive crashing noises coming from inside Terrence's house whenever Amber and Terrence were away. She said she genuinely feared for the safety of the young children who played in the neighborhood. She painted me as a ticking time bomb, a deranged lunatic who was terrorizing a peaceful, affluent community. The atmosphere in the courtroom was incredibly heavy and suffocating. Anyone sitting in those wooden benches of the gallery would look at me and see a tragic, broken menace who needed to be locked away behind heavy steel doors for the public good. The narrative was perfectly constructed. The evidence seemed entirely overwhelming. The grieving daughter-in-law, the heartbroken son, the terrified neighbor, the official medical diagnosis. Terrence's lawyer rested his case. He turned to the judge and stated that the evidence was absolutely undeniable. He pleaded with the court to grant immediate emergency guardianship to Terrence Holloway so he could take control of my finances and authorize my permanent relocation to a locked medical ward. He said that delaying this decision would result in a catastrophic and unavoidable tragedy. It looked like I was completely finished. It looked like the end of the line. It looked like I was about to be escorted out of the courtroom in heavy handcuffs and driven straight to a chemical prison where I would spend the rest of my life staring at a blank wall. Judge Harrison looked down at me from his high bench. His expression was full of pity, the absolute worst kind of pity. The kind of pity that strips a man of his dignity and turns him into a problem that needs to be permanently hidden away from society. I turned my head slightly and looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back at me. He did not look worried. He did not look intimidated. He looked like a man holding a lit match over an ocean of gasoline. The performance was over. It was time to burn the theater down. Judge Harrison looked over his glasses at our table. He asked if the defense had any witnesses to call or any statements to make before he ruled on the emergency petition. Marcus Sterling stood up. He did not rush. He took his time buttoning his suit jacket. He picked up a thick stack of folders from our table and walked calmly to the center of the courtroom. "Your Honor," Marcus began, his voice echoing clearly across the large room. "What we have just witnessed from the petitioners is indeed a tragedy, but the tragedy is not my client's mental state. The absolute tragedy is the staggering level of greed, perjury, and elder abuse sitting right across this aisle." Terrence's slick lawyer jumped to his feet, shouting an objection. He claimed Marcus was making baseless, inflammatory attacks. Judge Harrison raised his hand and told the lawyer to sit down. He looked at Marcus and told him he better have substantial proof to back up those heavy accusations. Marcus smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. He approached the bench and handed the judge 3 heavily sealed notarized envelopes. "Your Honor." Marcus said the petitioners have presented a single, highly questionable medical certificate from a doctor who operates out of a strip mall clinic. In response, I present to this court 3 comprehensive, independent psychiatric and neurological evaluations. These were conducted over the last 48 hours by the heads of neuroscience and psychiatry at 3 of the most prestigious medical institutions in the country. Judge Harrison broke the seals. The courtroom was dead silent as he read the first page, then the second, and then the third. These evaluations, Marcus continued, clearly state that Desmond Holloway is in perfect cognitive health. He possesses superior mental acuity, flawless memory retention, and 0 signs of paranoia or dementia. He is entirely capable of managing his own life and his own very extensive financial portfolio. The medical document submitted by the petitioners is not just inaccurate. It is a completely fabricated piece of fiction. The color instantly drained from Amber's face. She looked at Terrence with wide, terrified eyes. Terrence was frozen, staring at the floor. Their slick lawyer began frantically flipping through his own paperwork, suddenly realizing his clients had lied to him. Judge Harrison looked up from the documents. His expression had completely changed. The soft, sympathetic pity he had shown Amber was gone. It was replaced by the hard, furious glare of a man who realized he was being used to commit a crime. Marcus did not give them a single second to recover. You might ask yourself, "Your Honor, why a son and a daughter-in-law would construct such a vicious, elaborate lie," Marcus said, pacing slowly in front of the petitioner's table. "The answer is incredibly simple. It is the oldest motive in human history, pure, unadulterated greed." Marcus pulled a small digital audio player from his pocket and placed it on the evidence podium. He requested permission to enter the audio recordings into the official court record, noting that Georgia is a one-party consent state for recording conversations. The slick lawyer jumped up again, sweating profusely, babbling about privacy and inadmissible evidence. Judge Harrison slammed his wooden gavel down with a sharp, explosive crack. He ordered the lawyer to sit down and remain completely silent, or he would be held in contempt of court. The judge told Marcus to play the recordings. Marcus pressed the play button. The audio was crystal clear. The first voice that filled the silent courtroom was Richard Amber's arrogant father. The entire gallery heard him threaten me in my own penthouse. They heard him say, "Sign that deed right now. If you do not sign that house over right now, my lawyers will file a massive civil suit against you. Fight us, and I will make sure a judge declares you mentally incompetent and locks you in a state-run facility for the rest of your miserable life." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom gallery. Amber covered her mouth with her trembling hands. She was shaking violently. Marcus pressed a button, switching to the second file. "Now, Your Honor," Marcus announced, "let us hear from the loving, heartbroken son who filed this petition today. Let us hear why he really wants to lock his father in a chemical prison." The second recording started. It was the conversation from the freezing parking garage. Terrence's toxic, resentful voice echoed off the marble walls. "I stole that money because I deserved it," the voice of my son confessed loudly to the entire room. "Amber needs real money. Her wellness studio is failing. The investors are threatening to take everything we have. You are old, Dad. You had your time. Amber needs that money to save her career. We need your assets to survive, so we are going to do whatever it takes." When the recording finally stopped, the silence in the courtroom was absolute and completely suffocating. You could hear a pin drop. Terrence looked like a corpse. He was slouched so far down in his chair it looked like his spine had completely dissolved. He was staring blankly at the wooden table, his chest heaving with shallow, panicked breaths. He had just heard himself confess to federal theft extortion and a coordinated plot to falsely imprison his own father. Amber was no longer pretending to cry. She was staring at me with a look of pure, unmasked horror. The flawless, innocent victim routine had been entirely incinerated. Everyone in that room saw exactly what she was. A ruthless, manipulative parasite who was willing to destroy an innocent man's life to pay off her luxury debts. Their slick lawyer was already packing his briefcase. He knew his career was in severe jeopardy just for representing them. He completely distanced himself from his clients, sliding his chair away from Terrence. Judge Harrison sat at the high bench, his face practically vibrating with rage. He looked down at Terrence and Amber with a disgust so profound it was palpable. "In my 25 years sitting on this bench," Judge Harrison said, his voice trembling with furious authority, "I have never witnessed a more vile, calculated, and deeply disturbing abuse of the judicial system. You came into my courtroom, swore an oath on a Bible, and attempted to use the power of the state to kidnap, drug, and rob an innocent elder. You attempted to use me as your personal executioner." Judge Harrison slammed his gavel down so hard it echoed like a gunshot. "This petition for emergency guardianship is immediately and permanently dismissed with extreme prejudice," the judge roared, but he was not finished. He pointed a stern, shaking finger directly at Terrence and Amber. "Bailiffs, secure the doors," Judge Harrison ordered. The two armed deputies standing at the back of the courtroom immediately stepped forward and locked the heavy wooden doors. "I am not letting the two of you walk out of this building to destroy evidence," the judge continued, his voice echoing like thunder. "I am formally referring this matter to the Fulton County District Attorney right this second. I am ordering an immediate criminal investigation into Terrence Holloway and Amber Holloway for perjury, conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and the forgery of medical documents. You will remain seated at that table under the supervision of my bailiffs until the detectives arrive to take your statements." Terrence buried his face in his hands and let out a loud, agonizing sob. It was not a fake sob this time. It was the sound of a man realizing his entire life was completely over. Amber stared blankly ahead, completely paralyzed by the catastrophic reality of her situation. They were not leaving the courthouse as victorious guardians. They were leaving in the back of a police cruiser for intense questioning. I stood up from the defense table. I buttoned my tailored suit jacket. I did not look at my son. I did not look at his wife. They were ghosts to me now, nothing but a bad memory left behind in the dirt. Marcus patted me on the shoulder, a look of profound respect on his face. I walked down the center aisle of the courtroom. The people in the gallery parted from me, watching me with awe and absolute silence. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped out into the bright, echoing hallway of the courthouse. I took a deep breath of the cool air. The legal ambush was destroyed. My freedom was secured. But the war was not over yet. Tomorrow was the grand opening of Amber's flagship Pilates studio. And tomorrow I was going to deliver the final devastating blow. You would think that narrowly escaping a jail cell would humble a person. You would think that having a judge dismiss your fraudulent case, lock the courtroom doors, and order an immediate criminal investigation into your actions would make you hide in the shadows. But you cannot underestimate the sheer delusional arrogance of a woman who has never faced a real consequence in her entire life. By Friday evening, Terrence and Amber had been released from the holding cells at the police station. Amber's father, Richard, had immediately deployed his expensive corporate defense attorneys to post their bail and stall the district attorney. They were aggressively buying time, and in Amber's twisted narcissistic mind, buying time meant she had won. She truly believed that I was just a lucky old man. She thought my lawyer, Marcus Sterling, was just a pro bono attorney doing a charity favor for a poor retired warehouse worker. In her mind, she had lost a minor legal skirmish over an old, dusty house in Baldwin Hills. She had no idea that the house was just a decoy. She still had absolutely no clue about my real wealth, my penthouse, or the terrifying reality of who actually held the massive debt to her precious business. To her, I was still just Desmond, the bitter, stubborn old black man she had kicked out on Thanksgiving. Saturday was the highly anticipated grand opening of her flagship boutique Pilates and wellness studio in the wealthy Buckhead district. She had been planning this massive party for months. It was supposed to be her crowning achievement in high society. And instead of canceling it out of shame or legal panic, she and her parents decided to double down. Richard and Susan used their country club connections and their deep pockets to invite local lifestyle reporters, fitness bloggers, and minor city politicians. They were going to throw a massive, glamorous event with champagne caviar and red carpets to completely whitewash her image. They wanted to drown out any whispers from the courthouse with loud music and expensive public relations spin. They wanted to control the narrative. I knew all of this because my private investigator was tracking their every move, monitoring the caterers and the guest lists. But I did not need a secret report to know about the party, because on Saturday morning a courier delivered a thick gold embossed envelope directly to my old house. My trusted neighbor intercepted it and had it brought straight to my penthouse. I sat at my granite kitchen island and opened the heavy cream-colored paper. It was a VIP invitation to the grand opening. But it was the handwritten note on the back of the card that showed the true toxic depth of her vanity. Amber had written the note herself. She wrote that despite my vicious attempts to ruin their family yesterday, she was choosing the higher path. She wrote that she was inviting me to see what real modern success looks like. She suggested that seeing what she had built from the ground up might teach me to stop clinging to my miserable small life. And then at the very bottom she added a final venomous instruction. She wrote that I should please use the service entrance in the back alley if I decided to come because her high-profile guests would not appreciate my usual dirty attire. I read those words and I actually smiled. It was not a happy smile, it was the dark, quiet smile of a predator watching a deer walk willingly into a cage and lock the door from the inside. She was trying to humiliate me one last time. She wanted me to stand in the shadows of her shiny new studio in my worn-out flannel shirt looking like a defeated beggar, while she drank expensive champagne and played the triumphant self-made businesswoman. She wanted a victory lap at my expense. She wanted to prove to her parents that she was still superior. I stood up from the kitchen island. I walked down the long, sunlit hallway of my penthouse and entered my master bedroom. I walked right past the closet where I kept my faded denim jackets and my scuffed work boots. I opened the heavy glass doors of my formal wardrobe. For 5 long years, I had dressed down to make my son comfortable. I had hidden my massive success so he would not feel inadequate or insecure about his own life. I had played the role of the humble, aging father who needed to be taken care of. But that man was gone. That man officially died at the Thanksgiving dinner table. I reached into the back of the wardrobe and pulled out a bespoke midnight blue Tom Ford suit. It had been custom tailored for me on Savile Row in London. The fabric was lighter than air cut with absolute precision and immaculate in every single detail. I put on a crisp, perfectly pressed white silk blend dress shirt. I tied a dark silver silk tie around my collar. I stood in front of the full-length mirror and fastened a solid platinum Patek Philippe watch around my wrist. The timepiece alone was worth more than the luxury cars Terrence and Amber drove. I slid my feet into polished black Italian leather Oxfords that shone like black glass. I looked at my reflection. The tired, slumping posture was gone. I stood tall, my shoulders broad and square. I did not look like a retired, struggling warehouse worker. I looked exactly like what I was. A kingmaker, a titan of Atlanta commercial real estate. A man who could end a multi-million-dollar business with a single quiet phone call. I picked up the gold embossed invitation, folded it neatly, and slipped it into the inside breast pocket of my suit jacket. I grabbed my black metal financial cards and headed for the door. I took the private elevator down to the grand lobby of my high-rise. The concierge, a young man who usually saw me in casual weekend clothes, stood up completely straight when the elevator doors parted. He was used to keeping a low profile with me, but today he was looking at the chairman of the board. He quickly rushed over to hold the heavy glass lobby doors open for me. I stepped out into the bright, crisp Atlanta afternoon. Waiting for me at the curb was not my 1998 Ford pickup truck. I had called my private transportation service an hour earlier. A pristine, elongated black Rolls-Royce Phantom was idling smoothly on the street. The chrome grille gleamed in the sunlight. The driver, a tall man in a sharp black suit and white gloves, immediately opened the heavy rear coach door for me. He bowed his head slightly as I approached. I slid into the plush, cream-colored leather interior. The cabin was completely silent, heavily insulated from the noise and chaos of the city street. The driver closed the door with a soft, solid thud that sealed me in total luxury. He looked at me through the rearview mirror and asked for the destination. I gave him the address of Amber's luxury studio in the Buckhead district. I leaned back against the soft headrest and poured myself a glass of sparkling water from the chilled center console. The Rolls-Royce glided away from the curb, moving through the downtown traffic like a ghost ship. Amber wanted to put on a grand show for the media. She wanted to prove to the world and to her arrogant parents that she was an untouchable, successful elite. She had specifically invited me to watch her shine, hoping to crush whatever dignity I had left. I was going to give her exactly what she asked for. I was going to attend her glamorous little party, but I was absolutely not going to use the service entrance. I was going to walk through the front doors, step onto her red carpet, and bring her entire artificial empire crashing down around her feet. The pristine black Rolls-Royce Phantom smoothly glided to a halt in front of the massive glass facade of Amber's brand-new studio. The street in the affluent Buckhead district was lined with expensive imported sports cars and luxury SUVs, but my vehicle cast a long, heavy shadow over all of them. The driver immediately stepped out and opened my door. I stepped onto the pavement. There was a velvet rope line and a small red carpet rolled out for the guests. Local lifestyle photographers were snapping pictures of wealthy socialites walking through the front entrance. I did not go around to the back alley. I walked right up to the main doors. The security guards, two large men in cheap black suits, looked at my bespoke midnight blue Tom Ford tailoring, looked at my posture, and stepped aside instantly. They did not ask for my name or my invitation. True power does not need to introduce itself. It simply arrives and the world makes way. I walked into the main reception area, and the place was an absolute monument to financial vanity. It smelled of eucalyptus and expensive essential oils. There were imported Italian marble floors, gold-accented mirrors reaching to the high ceilings, and rows of state-of-the-art Pilates reformers that cost more than what most working families make in a year. Waiters in crisp white shirts floated through the dense crowd carrying silver trays loaded with crystal flutes of expensive champagne and tiny pretentious appetizers. The room was packed tightly with the exact kind of people Amber and her parents worshipped. Wealthy, entitled, predominantly white suburban elites who spent their weekends comparing country club memberships and gossiping about the people who served them. I stood near the back of the room completely unnoticed in the sea of designer dresses and expensive cologne, and then I heard her. Amber's voice echoed through the overhead surround sound system. She was standing on a slightly raised platform at the far end of the room, bathed in a warm, flattering spotlight. She was holding a microphone, wearing a sleek, incredibly expensive-looking black evening gown. Terrence stood obediently a few steps behind her, wearing a forced plastic smile that made him look like a well-dressed hostage. Richard and Susan, her arrogant parents, were sitting at a prime VIP table in the front row, looking up at their daughter like she was a conquering hero. I listened to the words coming out of my daughter-in-law's mouth, and the sheer audacity of her lies was almost breathtaking. "I look around this beautiful room tonight," Amber projected into the microphone, her voice dripping with fake humility and practiced emotion. "And I am just so overwhelmed with gratitude. Building this flagship wellness studio was the hardest thing I have ever done in my entire life. There were so many sleepless nights, so many sacrifices, so many moments where I thought I could not push any harder. But I did it. I built this beautiful vision from the ground up entirely on my own. I did not have handouts. I did not have a safety net. I relied on my own grit, my own determination, and my own relentless work ethic to make this dream a reality." I stood by the coat check and listened to her claim the title of a self-made woman, a woman who is currently drowning in $1.5 million of predatory commercial debt, a woman who had forged my dead wife's signature just 48 hours ago to try and steal my home. A woman who had stood in a courtroom yesterday weeping fake tears trying to lock me in a chemical prison so she could rob my accounts blind. And here she was, holding a glass of champagne, soaking up the applause of her wealthy friends, pretending she was an independent, highly successful entrepreneur. It was an absolute masterpiece of narcissistic delusion. I decided I had heard enough of her fairy tale. I stepped out of the shadows at the back of the room. I walked directly down the center aisle, moving slowly, deliberately, with the heavy, unyielding presence of a man who owned the very ground he was walking on. My leather Oxfords clicked sharply against the marble floor. The crowd was dense, but as I moved forward, people instinctively began to part. They looked at my tailored suit. They looked at the heavy platinum watch gleaming on my wrist, and they stepped aside. A murmur started to ripple through the room. The polite applause for Amber's speech slowly died out. The clinking of crystal glasses stopped completely. A heavy, incredibly awkward silence began to spread from the back of the room all the way to the front stage. Amber noticed the sudden shift in the room's energy. She stopped talking mid-sentence. She lowered the microphone and peered into the crowd, her brow furrowing as she tried to see what was causing the distraction. And then her eyes locked onto me. I stopped walking about 20 feet away from the stage. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting casually by my sides. I looked directly up at her. For a split second, I saw the genuine flash of absolute panic in her eyes. She recognized my face, but her brain could not process what she was seeing. She was expecting the broken-down old black man in the faded flannel shirt who she had directed to the service alley. She was not expecting a man radiating immense wealth and authority. But Amber was on a stage. Her parents were watching her. Her elite friends were watching. She had to maintain her dominant narrative. She had to put the old, bothersome man back in his place before her perfect image cracked. She gripped the microphone tightly, her knuckles turning white. She forced a harsh, ugly smirk onto her face, completely misreading the dynamic of the room. She raised the microphone back to her lips. "Well, look who decided to show up," Amber announced, her amplified voice echoing loudly and cruelly through the silent, tense room. "It seems my father-in-law got a little confused and wandered through the front doors. Tell me, Desmond, did you come all the way down here tonight to ask for a janitorial job? Because the service entrance is around back in the alley, and I think we already hired someone to mop these floors." A few cruel, uncomfortable chuckles erupted from Richard and Susan's table in the front row, but the rest of the room remained dead silent. People were deeply confused. They were looking at my bespoke luxury suit and trying to reconcile it with Amber's deeply insulting, degrading words. Behind her on the stage, Terrence finally snapped out of his trance. He realized what was happening, and his face turned an ugly shade of dark red. He was furious, embarrassed, and completely desperate to regain control of the situation before I ruined their public relations event. He marched down the steps of the stage and walked aggressively toward me, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. He stopped just inches from my face, trying to use his physical size and his youth to intimidate me. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Terrence hissed, keeping his voice low but filled with absolute venom. "Are you completely insane? After everything that happened in court yesterday, you actually show up here dressed in a rental suit to try and ruin my wife's biggest night. You do not belong here, old man. You are embarrassing yourself and you are embarrassing me. Turn around and walk out those doors right now before I have my security guards drag you out onto the street and call the police." I did not step back. I did not flinch. I did not blink. I looked at the pathetic, sweating man standing in front of me, the son who had tried to steal my freedom and auction off my life. He thought he was giving orders. He thought he was the man in charge. He had absolutely no idea that the guillotine was already falling. I let a cold, terrifying smile slowly spread across my face. I looked past Terrence, locking my eyes directly onto Amber, who was still standing on the stage, clutching her microphone. I took a deep breath, preparing to drop the bomb that would end their world forever. Terrence was right in my face, his breath smelling of stale coffee and absolute panic. He told me to leave. He threatened to have security drag me out onto the street. I did not say a single word to him. I did not even blink. I looked right through him, as if he was nothing but glass. The crowd was waiting for me to break to apologize, to shuffle out the front door like a beaten dog. Amber was standing on the stage with that arrogant smirk plastered across her face. She thought she had won. She thought this was the moment I finally bowed my head in defeat and accepted my place at the bottom of her social ladder. I just raised my right hand. I lifted 2 fingers in a silent, precise signal directed at the main entrance at the back of the room. The heavy glass doors swung open wide. The security guard stepped back immediately. A man walked into the room. He was not a police officer. He was not a security guard. He was William Prescott. William is the managing director of operations for the largest private equity and commercial real estate firm in the Southeast. He was wearing a flawless charcoal suit, carrying a thick black leather portfolio. His footsteps were heavy and authoritative on the imported Italian marble floor. The crowd parted for him just as they had parted for me. He did not look at the wealthy socialites. He did not look at the lifestyle reporters snapping pictures. He walked directly toward me. Terrence looked confused. He took a step back, his fake bravado instantly crumbling in the presence of real corporate authority. Amber lowered the microphone. Her smirk wavered and completely died. She recognized William Prescott. She had been in his office just months ago. She had begged him for the money to open this very studio. She had cried in his boardroom for the $1.5 million commercial loan when every single traditional bank in Atlanta had laughed in her face. She thought he was here to support her grand opening. She actually believed the managing director of her lending firm had come to celebrate her success. She forced a smile, preparing to welcome him to the stage. William stopped right next to me. He did not look at Amber. He turned his body slightly and bowed his head to me in a gesture of absolute, undeniable respect. He handed me the thick black leather portfolio. The room grew so quiet you could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning vents. William turned to face the crowd. He did not need a microphone. His voice was trained to command boardrooms and silence arrogant executives. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," William said, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent room. "I apologize for the sudden interruption to this evening's schedule, but there is a formal introduction that has been severely overlooked." Richard and Susan were leaning forward in their front row seats, their faces tight with confusion and mounting dread. The reporters were holding their cameras steady, sensing a massive shift in the atmosphere. William looked directly at Amber, who was now gripping the microphone stand so hard her knuckles were pure white. "You all know Vanguard Legacy," William announced clearly. "We are the venture capital firm that financed this entire operation. We hold the primary commercial lease for this building, and we hold the exclusive debt structure that allowed this business to open its doors." Amber nodded slowly, looking desperate for his validation in front of her high society friends. But William was not smiling. His face was a mask of cold corporate execution. "It has come to our attention," William continued, his voice completely ruthless, "that the proprietor of this establishment has been telling the public that she built this business entirely on her own. She claims she had no help, no safety net, and no silent benefactors. That is a complete and absolute fabrication. This studio exists solely because of the extraordinary grace and the direct financial backing of one single private investor." William stepped back and extended his hand respectfully toward me. The entire room held its collective breath. "Please allow me to formally introduce the founder, the chairman of the board, and the sole private financial backer of Vanguard Legacy." William projected loudly, "Mr. Desmond Holloway." The silence that followed that sentence was heavier than gravity. It was the sound of an entire room experiencing a collective paralyzing state of shock. Cameras flashed blindingly. A reporter in the second row audibly dropped his notepad on the marble floor. The lifestyle bloggers stared at me with their mouths hanging wide open. The poor, senile old black man in the faded flannel shirt was a myth. The man standing before them in the midnight blue bespoke Tom Ford suit was a titan. The reaction from my so-called family was a masterpiece of human devastation. Terrence physically staggered backward, bumping hard into a row of expensive Pilates reformers. He looked at me like I was a mythological creature that just stepped out of the shadows to devour him. His brain was completely short-circuiting. The father he treated like a charity case, the father he tried to lock in a psychiatric ward just yesterday, was the chairman of a multi-million-dollar private equity firm. The old warehouse worker was a real estate shark. Richard and Susan were frozen in their chairs. All the color drained from Richard's face, leaving him looking like a sick, terrified ghost. His elitist arrogance, his country club superiority evaporated into thin air. Susan covered her mouth with her trembling hands, realizing she had insulted the man who literally owned her daughter's entire future. But the absolute best reaction belonged to Amber. The microphone slipped out of her trembling hand. It hit the wooden stage with a loud, piercing screech of audio feedback that made half the room cover their ears in pain. Her knees literally buckled beneath her expensive black gown. She dropped down, catching herself heavily on the podium. Her eyes were wide with a horror so profound it bordered on absolute madness. She realized the catastrophic magnitude of her situation in real time. The man she just publicly humiliated, the man she just told to go scrub the floors in the back alley, was the apex predator of the Atlanta commercial real estate market. I stepped forward. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the quiet, terrifying authority of a man who controlled every single oxygen molecule in the room. You wanted to show me what real modern success looks like, Amber, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the dead silence. Let us talk about success. You do not own this studio. I own this studio. You do not hold the lease to this commercial property. My firm owns the deed to this entire building. You are standing on my marble floors. You are breathing my air conditioning. And you owe my company $1.5 million in high-yield predatory debt. She was hyperventilating on the stage. She could not speak. She could not even form a coherent thought. She just shook her head back and forth as thick, dark tears of absolute terror ruined her perfectly contoured makeup. You thought I was just a retired worker who did not understand adult financial matters? I continued throwing her mother's vile Thanksgiving insult right back in her face. You thought you could steal $80,000 from my emergency fund, forge my dead wife's signature on a hard money loan, and then declare me mentally incompetent in a court of law to cover your tracks. You thought you were dealing with a helpless, lonely old man. I opened the thick black leather portfolio William had handed me. I pulled out a crisp white, legally binding document. I held it up high for the entire room to see. I let the rapid flash of the reporters' cameras illuminate the heavy black ink on the paper. You wanted to build a luxury empire on the back of my sacrifices, I said, my eyes locking onto hers with absolutely zero mercy. But you forgot the most important rule of doing business in this city. You never insult the man who holds the keys to your cage. The old man you tried to bury alive just woke up, and he is here to collect every single thing you owe him. The crystal champagne flute slipped from Amber's trembling fingers. It hit the imported marble floor and shattered into 1,000 tiny, glittering pieces. The sharp, explosive sound of the breaking glass echoed through the deathly silent room, breaking the spell that had temporarily paralyzed the crowd. She stared down at the broken crystal scattered at her feet as if she were looking at the shattered, jagged remains of her own life. At the VIP table in the front row, Richard and Susan were physically shaking. The arrogant country club superiority they had worn like armor just moments ago had completely evaporated. Richard's legs trembled so violently that he had to grip the edge of the table with both hands, just to keep himself from collapsing out of his chair. All the color had drained from Susan's face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. The condescending smirks they had directed at me were gone. They were no longer looking at a poor, annoying father-in-law. They were staring at the executioner who held their daughter's entire fate in the palm of his hand. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. When you hold all the cards, you can whisper and the whole world will strain to listen. I reached into the thick black leather portfolio William had handed me. I pulled out the first document and held it up so the stark black text was visible to the entire room. This, I said smoothly, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal authority, is a formal and immediate notice of commercial eviction. When my firm approved the lease for this building, we included a very specific, very strict moral and ethical conduct clause. Attempting to falsely imprison an elderly man, extorting his assets, and committing perjury in a court of law constitutes a catastrophic violation of those terms. Therefore, your lease is officially terminated as of this exact moment. You have absolutely no legal right to occupy this space. By tomorrow morning, the locks on these doors will be changed and all of this imported equipment will be seized as partial payment for your breach of contract. Amber let out a choked, agonizing gasp. She reached out blindly and grabbed the wooden podium to keep her knees from giving out completely. Her flagship studio, the crown jewel of her fake success, the place she had invited the local media to admire, was being ripped away from her in real time. The lifestyle reporters in the audience were furiously typing on their phones, documenting the most spectacular, humiliating public downfall in Atlanta's high society history. But I was not finished. I reached into the portfolio again and pulled out a second, much thicker stack of papers. The eviction only takes away your playground, Amber, I continued, my voice dropping to a low, unforgiving register. This document takes away everything else. This is a formal notice of immediate loan recall. Vanguard Legacy is demanding the full repayment of the $1.5 million commercial loan you took out to fund this vanity project, and we are demanding it today. Terrence finally found his voice. He took a shaky, stumbling step forward, his hands raised in a desperate, pathetic gesture of surrender. "Dad, please," he begged, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated terror. "We do not have that kind of money. You know we do not have it. If you recall the loan right now, we are completely bankrupt. We lose the house, we lose the cars, we lose absolutely everything." "You already lost everything, Terrence," I replied coldly, shifting my gaze to the son who had sold his soul for a seat at a table that never respected him. You lost it the moment you decided to use a forged property deed as collateral for that massive loan. You lost it the moment you decided to forge the signature of my late wife Vivian Holloway on federal banking documents to try and steal the home we built together. The crowd erupted into shocked, disgusted gasps. Forging a dead woman's signature to steal a house from an elderly father was a level of depravity that even the most cynical socialites in the room could not stomach. People physically took steps backward, creating a wide circle of isolation around Terrence and Amber, distancing themselves as if the couple were suddenly contagious. Richard buried his face in his hands, realizing with absolute horror that his daughter was not just a failed businesswoman, but a federal criminal. Did you really think you could use my dead wife's name to fund your luxury lifestyle and I would just let it slide? I asked, my voice vibrating with a quiet, lethal fury. Did you honestly think I would not verify the collateral on a loan issued by my own private equity firm? Before Terrence could stutter out another pathetic excuse, the heavy glass doors at the main entrance swung open once again. The flashing red and blue lights of police cruisers parked on the street illuminated the dark evening sky outside, casting an eerie, frantic glow over the marble lobby. 4 uniformed police officers marched into the studio, their heavy boots thudding rhythmically against the floor. Leading them was Chief Detective Harrison, the veteran investigator I had personally met with earlier that day to hand over the forged loan applications and the audio recordings of their coordinated conspiracy. The detective did not look at the wealthy guests. He did not care about the champagne, the expensive essential oils, or the red carpet. He walked straight down the center aisle, his eyes locked entirely on my son, Terrence Holloway. The detective announced, his deep, authoritative voice cutting through the rising panic in the room like a machete. You are under arrest for federal bank fraud, identity theft, the forgery of legal documents, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. Terrence began to hyperventilate. He backed away, bumping blindly into a row of expensive Pilates machines, shaking his head frantically. No, wait, you do not understand, he babbled, hot tears streaming down his face. It was not just me. It was her idea. It was all her idea. She made me do it. He pointed a trembling, cowardly finger directly at his wife, throwing her under the bus the second the threat of a prison cell became real. 2 officers stepped forward, grabbed Terrence roughly by the arms, and spun him around. The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed through the room like a final, undeniable death sentence. Terrence sobbed openly, his knees buckling as the officers held him upright by his expensive tailored jacket. Amber screamed. It was a visceral, high-pitched sound of absolute unhinged panic. She stumbled off the stage, her expensive black evening gown catching under her heels. She ran toward her parents, completely abandoning the husband who had just betrayed her. Dad, do something, she cried hysterically, reaching out for Richard with grasping hands. Call the lawyers. Stop them. Please do not let them take us. But Richard just stood up and physically pulled his wife Susan away from their daughter. He looked at Amber with a mixture of sheer horror, profound shame, and cold self-preservation. He knew that associating with her now meant going down with a sinking ship. The elite social circles they belonged to would never forgive an association with federal fraud and elder abuse. He turned his back on his own daughter, grabbed Susan by the arm, and started pushing his way aggressively through the crowd toward the side exit. That was the absolute breaking point for the guests. The glamorous high society party instantly dissolved into complete chaotic panic. The wealthy socialites, the fitness influencers, and the local politicians all scrambled for the doors like rats fleeing a burning building. Nobody wanted to be photographed near a federal crime scene. Women in expensive heels abandoned their crystal champagne glasses on the floor. Men in tailored suits pushed past each other, shouting for their cars at the valet stand. The studio was a whirlwind of shouting, running, and blinding camera flashes from the reporters who stayed behind to capture every agonizing second of the arrest. The grand opening had officially transformed into a sensational crime scene. I stood perfectly still in the center of the chaos. The storm was raging all around me, tearing down the fake luxurious world Amber and Terrence had built on a foundation of lies and stolen money. I watched the police officers march my crying, broken son toward the exit. I watched his arrogant wife collapse onto the marble floor, weeping alone in the wreckage of her studio as her parents abandoned her to her fate. They wanted to bury me. They wanted to steal my mind, my money, and my dignity. But the quiet old man they had underestimated had just leveled their entire existence without ever raising his voice. The flashing red and blue lights from the police cruisers parked out on the street pierced through the heavy glass windows of the Pilates studio. The strobe effect cast long, chaotic shadows across the imported Italian marble floors. The glamorous grand opening had completely evaporated. The wealthy guests, the lifestyle reporters, and the local politicians had all scattered into the night like roaches fleeing a sinking ship. The only people left in the massive eucalyptus-scented room were the police officers, my managing director William, myself, and the two people whose entire world had just violently collapsed. I stood near the center of the room with my hands resting calmly in the pockets of my tailored suit. I did not move. I simply watched the brutal, inevitable reality of federal criminal charges set in. When a person builds their entire life on a foundation of lies, vanity, and stolen money, they do not possess the structural integrity to handle true adversity. When the walls close and their polished manners disappear, they revert to their most primal, vicious instincts. I was about to watch the final, ugly destruction of my son's marriage. Amber was still on the floor, surrounded by the shattered pieces of her crystal champagne flute. Her parents had abandoned her. Her elite social circle had vanished. She looked up and saw two police officers moving toward her with a second pair of heavy steel handcuffs. The sheer, paralyzing terror in her eyes quickly mutated into something entirely different. It turned into a raw, venomous instinct for self-preservation. She scrambled backward on the marble floor, her expensive black evening gown tearing under her knees. She pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at Terrence, who was already handcuffed and weeping softly in the grip of two detectives. "Do not touch me," Amber screamed at the approaching officers, her voice shrill and completely unhinged. "I did not do anything. I am a victim here." It was him. It was all him. He is the one who forged the signatures. He is the one who went into his father's accounts. I did not know anything about a fake deed. He lied to me. Terrence snapped his head up. His bloodshot eyes widened in absolute shock as he listened to his wife, the woman he had sold his soul to impress, completely throw him into the fire to save her own skin. Amber scrambled to her feet, ignoring the officers, and took a step toward Terrence. Her face was twisted into an ugly mask of hatred. "He manipulated me," she yelled, looking at the lead detective while pointing violently at her husband. "He told me his father was just a useless, senile old man. He told me Desmond was a burden who was going to die soon anyway, and that the money belonged to him. He said it was his inheritance, and he was just taking it early. He made me do the video. He told me to call the doctors. He orchestrated the entire thing because he is a degenerate gambler who owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to criminals. I am just his wife. I trusted him." The illusion of their perfect high society romance shattered into a million jagged pieces right in front of my eyes. Stripped of their luxury cars, their fine dining, and their unearned superiority, they were nothing but two starving rats trapped in a sinking cage, viciously chewing each other to the bone just to survive another 5 minutes. Terrence, usually a coward who avoided confrontation at all costs, finally snapped. The sheer betrayal from the woman he worshipped pushed him over the edge of sanity. He lunged forward against the grip of the police officers, his face contorted with a mixture of profound grief and explosive rage. "You lying, greedy parasite," Terrence roared, his voice cracking under the emotional strain. "You begged for this studio. You cried every single night saying you would leave me if I did not find the money to fund your pathetic vanity project. You are the one who dug through my mother's old files to find her signature. You handed me the pen and stood over my shoulder while I traced it on the loan application. You told me it was the only way to save our marriage." He strained against the handcuffs, spitting his words at her like poison. "You never loved me," Terrence shouted, tears streaming down his face. "You just loved what you thought I could steal for you." "Shut up!" Amber shrieked back, covering her ears. "You are a weak, pathetic excuse for a man. You could not even provide for me without robbing your own father." The detectives had seen enough. Chief Detective Harrison signaled to his team. "That is quite enough from both of you," the detective stated firmly. "You can continue this lovely marital discussion in the interrogation rooms. Read them their rights and get them out of here." The officers grabbed Amber by the arms. She kicked and thrashed, screaming hysterically as the cold steel handcuffs locked around her wrists. She wailed for her father, completely forgetting that Richard had already fled the building to protect his own reputation. As the officers began to drag Terrence toward the heavy glass exit doors, the absolute finality of the situation crashed down upon him. He was going to federal prison. He was losing his home, his wife, his freedom, and his entire future. In a last, desperate, pathetic act of survival, Terrence dropped his dead weight. His knees hit the hard marble floor with a heavy thud. The officers tried to pull him back up, but he twisted his body and threw himself forward, landing directly at my feet. He reached out with his cuffed hands and grabbed the fine wool fabric of my tailored trousers. He clung to my leg like a drowning man clutching a piece of driftwood. He looked up at me, his face completely covered in sweat, snot, and tears. He was practically hyperventilating, begging me with a visceral, animalistic desperation. "Dad, please." Terrence sobbed, his voice reduced to a pathetic whimper. "Please, you have to stop this. You have the power to stop this. Tell them you gave me permission. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I will do anything. I will work in your warehouses for the rest of my life. I will pay back every single cent. Please, Dad. I am your son. You are my father. Mom would not want this. Please, for the memory of my mother, do not let them take me away in chains." He played the final card. He invoked the memory of Vivian. He dared to use the name of the beautiful, hardworking woman whose signature he had forged to steal the home she died in. I looked down at the weeping, broken man clinging to my leg. I searched my heart for any lingering trace of paternal sympathy. I searched for a flicker of sadness or regret. But there was absolutely nothing. The chamber of my heart that used to hold my love for him had been permanently sealed and boarded up. I felt nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. I was looking at a stranger who had tried to bury me alive. I looked at the police officers. They had paused for a brief moment, respecting the gravity of a father looking at his arrested son. I slowly and deliberately took a step backward. The fabric of my trousers slipped smoothly out of Terrence's cuffed hands. He fell forward slightly, his hands hitting the empty marble floor. I looked down into his desperate, terrified eyes. My voice was quiet, steady, and colder than a winter storm. "When your wife slammed her glass down at the Thanksgiving dinner table," I said, pronouncing every single word with absolute clarity. "When she looked me in the eye, called me a burden, and told me to shut my mouth in front of her arrogant parents, you had a choice. You chose to sit there. You chose to look at your plate. You chose to stand perfectly still and let her strip away my dignity." Terrence let out a low, agonizing moan, shaking his head in denial, knowing exactly what was coming next. So now I continued my expression, completely devoid of mercy. It is my turn to stand perfectly still and watch the law go to work. I turned my back on him. I did not hesitate. I did not look over my shoulder. I buttoned my suit jacket and gave a brief nod to William Prescott, who was standing quietly near the reception desk. "Take them away," Chief Harrison ordered the officers. As I walked toward the heavy glass doors leading out to the street, the sounds of their destruction echoed behind me. I heard Terrence screaming my name in absolute agony. I heard Amber sobbing and cursing the officers as they dragged her across the floor. The sounds of their frantic, vicious downfall bounced off the mirrored walls and the high ceilings of the luxury studio they had stolen to build. I pushed open the doors and stepped out into the crisp, cool night air of Atlanta. The pristine black Rolls-Royce Phantom was waiting for me at the curb, the rear door already held open by the driver. I slid into the quiet, plush leather interior. The heavy door closed with a solid thud, completely cutting off the sound of the police sirens and the screaming from inside the building. I leaned back against the headrest and closed my eyes. The war was over. The rats were finally locked in their cage, and I was going home. 8 months have passed since the night the flashing lights of the police cruisers illuminated the marble floors of that luxury Pilates studio. 8 months since the carefully constructed illusions of my son and his arrogant wife completely shattered. The seasons have changed in Atlanta. The cold, bitter winter has given way to a warm and deeply breathing southern summer. And just like the changing of the seasons, the landscape of my entire life has been completely reborn. The justice system is often slow, but when you hand federal prosecutors a silver platter loaded with digital audio confessions, forged bank documents, and a paper trail of stolen money, the wheels turn with absolute and devastating efficiency. Terrence did not try to fight the charges in court. Once his expensive defense attorney saw the mountain of evidence Marcus had compiled, including the testimony of the corrupt doctor who flipped on them to save his own medical license, Terrence took a plea deal. He is currently sitting in a federal correctional facility just outside of the state, serving a mandatory 3-year sentence for bank fraud and conspiracy. The tailored suits and the expensive imported shoes are gone, replaced by a standard-issue uniform. He has tried to write me several letters since he was incarcerated. They arrive at my lawyer office, thick envelopes filled with apologies and regrets. I do not open them. I place them in a locked drawer in my study. Perhaps one day, years from now, I will find the grace to read them. But right now the wound is too deep and the betrayal was too profound. He made his choices and now he has to sit in a concrete cell and live with the echo of his own consequences. Amber faced a destruction that was far worse than a prison sentence for someone with her specific kind of vanity. She managed to avoid jail time by turning state evidence against the document forger and cooperating fully with the federal investigators, but her life as she knew it was completely obliterated. When Vanguard Legacy initiated the immediate recall of her $1.5 million commercial loan, the financial avalanche was absolute. Because she had fraudulently used my property as collateral, the debt defaulted entirely onto her and Terrence personally. The bankruptcy court stripped her bare. They seized the luxury cars, they emptied the bank accounts, they even forced the liquidation of her expensive designer wardrobe and her jewelry just to satisfy the crushing legal fees and the outstanding creditor judgments. She lost the studio, she lost the penthouse apartment they were renting, and most importantly to her, she lost her completely fabricated social standing. The wealthy friends who used to drink champagne with her at the country club deleted her number the moment the scandal hit the local news. Without my money to prop up her lifestyle, the illusion vanished. Today, Amber is living back in her childhood bedroom in her parents' house. But it is not a happy reunion. Richard and Susan, the arrogant people who once sat in my penthouse and threatened to destroy me, are now social pariahs. The elite circles they fought so hard to impress have completely shunned them for being associated with a high-profile federal fraud case. They blame Amber for their humiliation. She is trapped in a house filled with resentment, forced to work a minimum-wage administrative job just to help pay off the remaining legal debts she accumulated. She wanted to be a high-society queen, but her greed turned her into a prisoner of her own making. While their world collapsed, my world finally found a sense of profound, unbroken peace. Maya, my 16-year-old granddaughter, officially lives with me full-time now. Getting full legal guardianship of her was the easiest battle Marcus and I ever fought. The courts took one look at her father's criminal record and her stepmother's financial ruin, and the papers were signed without a single objection. Having Maya in the penthouse has brought a light back into my life that I thought was extinguished when my wife Vivian passed away. Maya is brilliant, resilient, and possesses a quiet strength that reminds me so much of her grandmother. We spend our evenings cooking dinner together in the massive kitchen, listening to classic soul music and talking about her future. She is no longer the quiet, anxious girl hiding in the shadows of a toxic house. She is thriving, making top grades at a prestigious preparatory academy that I gladly pay for in cash. I realized very quickly that the vast empire I had built over 40 years needed a new purpose. Hoarding wealth is a hollow victory if it does not leave the world a little better than you found it. So 3 months ago, I took a massive portion of my portfolio and established the Vivian Holloway Memorial Foundation. It is a fully funded, comprehensive endowment designed to provide full-ride college scholarships to underprivileged minority youth in the Atlanta area. We focus on young men and women who have the drive and the intellect to succeed, but lack the financial safety net to get their foot in the door. I wanted to build a ladder for the kids who are currently standing exactly where Vivian and I stood 50 years ago. But I am not running the foundation alone. I made Maya the official CEO manager and junior director of the board. Every Saturday morning she sits with me in my study and I teach her the reality of commercial real estate asset management and philanthropic development. I am teaching her how to read a balance sheet, how to negotiate a contract, and how to spot a bad investment. I am giving her the financial education I tried to give Terrence, but this time it is falling on fertile ground. She is learning how to be a titan, how to build wealth with integrity, and how to use power to lift people up instead of tearing them down. Tonight the penthouse is perfectly quiet. Maya is in her room studying for her advanced placement exams. I am standing out on the massive glass terrace feeling the warm night breeze brush against my face. I am holding a heavy crystal glass filled with neat 20-year-old Kentucky bourbon. I take a slow sip, letting the smooth, smoky burn warm my chest. I look down at the sprawling, glittering lights of the Atlanta skyline. The city stretches out for miles, a sea of gold and white pulsing with life. I look at the commercial high-rises in the distance, knowing that my name is quietly printed on the deeds of several of those buildings. I look at the streets where I used to haul freight until my hands bled. I survived the betrayal of my own flesh and blood. I survived the insidious greed of a society that tried to write me off as a weak, disposable old man. I did not just survive it, I conquered it. I reclaimed my name, I protected my true legacy, and I secured the future for the one child who actually deserved it. They say silence is a sign of weakness. They assume that when an old man quietly picks up his keys and walks out the door, he has accepted defeat. But they forget that the quietest storms are the ones that tear down the strongest houses. Respect is not something you inherit, and wealth does not grant you the right to strip away another person's dignity. If you build your empire on the back of someone else's sacrifice, do not be surprised when they decide to repossess the bricks. True power does not scream. It simply reclaims what it owns. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to leave a comment below and share your thoughts. Have you ever had to stand up to toxic family members who mistreated your kindness? Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story about finding your strength and taking back your power. Thank you for listening, and remember to always protect your peace.